High above the English Channel, aboard the luxurious Prometheus airliner, a deadly mystery unfolds. A woman slumps dead in her seat, a poisoned thorn in her neck, a blowpipe hidden under Hercule Poirot's chair. Was it the flirtatious hairdresser, the charming dentist, the secretive countess? A wasp buzzes, secrets unravel, and Poirot's little grey cells race to catch a killer before they vanish into the clouds. Who struck in plain sight, and how? The truth is closer than you think. Dare to uncover it. Chapter 1. The Prometheus takes flight. The air was thick with the hum of engines, a low, persistent drone that vibrated through the polished cabin of the Prometheus, an elegant airliner slicing through the skies from Paris to Croydon. Poirot, seated in the plush leather of seat No. 9, adjusted his immaculate bow tie and suppressed a grimace. Air travel, with its unnatural defiance of gravity, did not sit well with the meticulous Belgian detective. His small, fastidious hands gripped the armrests, and his sharp, green eyes darted about, seeking distraction from the queasy lurch in his stomach. The cabin, though luxurious for 1935, felt claustrophobic, its 12 passengers packed into a space that seemed to shrink with every passing cloud dot to his left. In seat No. 12 sat Jane Grey, a young hairdresser with a cascade of chestnut curls and a dreamy expression. Her gaze lingered on Norman Gale, a handsome dentist in seat No. 16, whose boyish smile flashed as he adjusted his cufflinks across the aisle. In seat No. 13, the Countess of Horbury lounged with the studied grace of aristocracy, her crimson nails tapping restlessly against a silver cigarette case. Her eyes, shadowed by kohl, betrayed a nervous edge, as if the altitude unsettled more than her equilibrium. Poirot noted her unease with interest, his little grey cells already cataloguing the peculiarities of his fellow travelers. In seat No. 5, Daniel Clancy, a detective novelist with a mop of unruly hair, swatted irritably at a wasp buzzing near his ear. "Blasted thing," he muttered, his voice carrying a theatrical lilt, as if he were narrating one of his own lurid tales. The wasp, undeterred, circled back, its tiny wings a faint whine against the engine's roar. Poirot's lips twitched. The man's agitation was disproportionate, almost performative. Nearby, in seats No. 10 and 11, the archaeologists Armand and Jean Dupont, father and son, pored over a tattered map, their French whispers animated with scholarly fervor. Their excitement about a recent dig in Persia seemed genuine, yet Poirot sensed a guarded quality in their glances. The cabin's other occupants were no less intriguing. Venetia Kerr, a poised woman in seat No. 4, scribbled in a leather-bound notebook, her pen pausing occasionally to scan the cabin with cool detachment. Dr. Roger Bryant, in seat No. 6, adjusted his spectacles and read a medical journal, his face a mask of professional calm. The stewards, Henry Mitchell and Albert Davis, moved with practiced efficiency, offering coffee and pastries to passengers who barely acknowledged them. Poirot, however, caught Mitchell's fleeting frown as he passed Madame Giselle in seat No. 2, a French moneylender whose severe black dress and stern profile suggested a woman accustomed to command. Madame Giselle, Poirot knew by reputation, was no ordinary passenger. Her name was whispered in Parisian salons as a moneylender who thrived on the secrets of the elite. Her clients, it was said, paid not just in francs but in silence, their indiscretions locked in her ironclad ledgers. She sat alone, her gloved hands folded, her eyes fixed on the window where clouds churned like a restless sea. Poirot wondered what debts or scandals she carried with her. High above the earth, the flight progressed smoothly, the Prometheus cutting through the stratosphere with the grace of a silver dart. Jane Grey, emboldened by a glass of champagne, struck up a tentative conversation with Norman Gale. "Do you fly often, Mr. Gale?" she asked, her voice bright but tinged with nerves. Gale's smile widened, his teeth gleaming. "Only when I must, Miss Grey. But I confess, the view from up here is rather splendid." Their banter, light and flirtatious, drew a scowl from the Countess, who lit a cigarette with a sharp flick of her lighter. Poirot, ever the observer, noted the interplay of glances and gestures. The Duponts' whispers grew hushed when Mitchell passed. Venetia Kerr's pen paused when the Countess sighed loudly, and Daniel Clancy, still batting at the elusive wasp, seemed to study his fellow passengers with a writer's calculating eye. The wasp, Poirot thought, was an oddity. Its presence in the sealed cabin was inexplicable, a tiny anomaly that nagged at his orderly mind as the flight neared its midpoint. The stewards began preparing for the descent. Mitchell, balancing a tray of empty cups, moved toward the rear of the cabin. Poirot watched him closely, noting the steward's slight hesitation as he approached Madame Giselle. "Madame, would you care for anything else?" Mitchell asked, his tone polite but strained. Giselle shook her head, her lips a thin line, and Mitchell moved on. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Something in the exchange felt off, though he could not yet place it. The air grew colder as the plane began its descent, the engines shifting to a lower pitch. Passengers adjusted their coats and hats, preparing for arrival. Jane Grey laughed softly at something Gale said, while the Countess stubbed out her cigarette with unnecessary force. Daniel Clancy, finally rid of the wasp, tucked his notebook away, his fingers lingering on its cover. Poirot, feeling the familiar tug of curiosity, leaned forward slightly, his gaze sweeping the cabin. It was then that Albert Davis, the second steward, approached Madame Giselle with a routine check. "Madame Giselle," Davis said, his voice faltering. He leaned closer, his hand hovering over her shoulder. Poirot's senses sharpened as Davis's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. The steward's hand shook as he touched Giselle's arm, then recoiled. "Sir," he called, his voice cracking as he turned to Mitchell. She's not moving." Mitchell hurried over, his tray clattering to the floor. Passengers turned, their conversations dying as the stewards huddled around Giselle's seat. Poirot rose, his airsickness forgotten, and made his way forward, his small frame moving with surprising agility. "Permit me," he said, his voice calm but commanding. The steward stepped aside, and Poirot knelt beside Giselle, his fingers brushing her wrist. Her skin was cool, her pulse absent, her head lolled slightly, revealing a tiny puncture mark on her neck, barely visible against her pale skin. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his eyes scanning the wound. A faint discoloration surrounded it, suggesting something more sinister than a simple sting. He straightened, his gaze sweeping the cabin. The passengers, now alert, stared back, their faces a mix of shock and curiosity. Jane Grey clutched her handbag, her flirtatious smile gone. Norman Gale's hands tightened on his armrests. The Countess's cigarette case slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. "Messieurs et Madame," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the rising murmurs. "I regret to inform you that Madame Giselle is dead." A gasp rippled through the cabin. Daniel Clancy's pen froze midair, and the DuPonts exchanged a glance that Poirot did not miss. Venetia Kerr closed her notebook with a snap, while Dr. Bryant rose, offering his services. "I'm a doctor," he said, stepping forward. Poirot nodded, allowing him to examine the body, but his own mind was already racing. Death in the clouds, so silent, so swift. How had it happened under so many eyes? As Bryant confirmed Giselle's death, Poirot's gaze fell on something glinting beneath his own seat. He bent down, his fingers closing around a slender, wooden tube, no longer than a pencil, a blowpipe. His heart quickened. This was no accident, no natural death. The tiny thorn in Giselle's neck, the exotic weapon now in his hand, these were the tools of murder. The chapter ends with the plane's descent into Croydon. The passengers silent, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. Poirot, clutching the blowpipe, feels the weight of their stares. The truth, he whispers to himself, is hidden in the clouds, but Hercule Poirot will find it. The cabin lights dim as the Prometheus touches down, and the mystery of death at 10,000 feet begins. Chapter 2. A Thorn of Suspicion. The Prometheus touched down on the rain-slicked tarmac of Croydon Aerodrome with a gentle lurch, its engines winding down to a low hum that seemed to echo the unease rippling through the cabin. The passengers, a motley assembly of travelers bound by the shared journey from Paris, stirred in their seats, their faces a mix of relief at being back on solid ground and curiosity at the commotion unfolding at the front of the plane. Poirot, seated in No. 9, adjusted his neatly pressed suit and dabbed at his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief, his airsickness mercifully subsiding now that the plane was still. His sharp eyes, however, missed nothing, not the steward's ashen face, nor the way the passengers craned their necks toward seat No. 2, where Madame Giselle, the notorious French moneylender, remained unnaturally still. The steward, Henry Mitchell, a wiry man with a perpetually anxious expression, hovered near the lifeless figure. His hands trembled as he whispered to his colleague, Albert Davis, who stood frozen, clutching a tray of empty coffee cups. "She's dead," Mitchell said again, his voice barely audible over the shuffle of passengers gathering their belongings. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, drawing gasps and murmurs from those close enough to hear. Poirot, ever attuned to the subtleties of human behavior, noted the reactions. Jane Grey, the young hairdresser in seat No. 4, clutched her handbag tightly, her eyes darting toward Norman Gale. The dentist in No. 12, who seemed more preoccupied with adjusting his tie than with the unfolding drama. The Countess of Horbury, seated in No. 13, froze mid-motion, her gloved hand poised over a silver cigarette case, her face a mask of aristocratic disdain tinged with something else, fear, perhaps. Daniel Clancy, the detective novelist in No. 6, scribbled furiously in a small notebook, his lips twitching as if he were narrating the scene to himself. Poirot rose from his seat with deliberate calm, his small frame radiating an authority that belied his stature. "Messieurs, Madame," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade, "please remain seated. There is a matter most grave that requires our attention." His French accent, polished yet unmistakable, commanded immediate silence. The passengers obeyed, their curiosity now edged with apprehension. Poirot approached Madame Giselle's seat, his steps measured, his mustache quivering slightly as he took in the scene. The woman, in her late 50s, was slumped forward, her head resting at an unnatural angle. Her face, once stern and commanding, was now slack, her eyes half opened, staring blankly at the seat in front of her. A tiny mark, no larger than a pinprick, marred the side of her neck, a thorn, embedded in the flesh, surrounded by a faint redness. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, leaning closer but careful not to touch the body. He noted the faint sheen of moisture around the wound, a residue that suggested something more sinister than a mere insect sting. His gaze swept the cabin, landing on a curious object wedged beneath his own seat, a slender, bamboo-like tube, no longer than a foot, with a polished finish. A blowpipe. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The discovery was as shocking as it was improbable. How had such a thing gone unnoticed during the flight? And why, of all places, was it under his seat? Before he could ponder further, the cabin door swung open, admitting a gust of damp English air and the unmistakable figure of Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard. Japp, a burly man with a weathered face and a perpetual air of exasperation, strode down the aisle, his overcoat flapping. "Right. What's all this, then?" he barked, his eyes scanning the passengers before landing on Poirot. "Blimey, Poirot, you again. Can't take a holiday without stumbling over a corpse, can you?" Poirot inclined his head, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Inspector Japp, my old friend, it seems fate has a way of placing me where I am needed, but I assure you, I am as surprised as you by this unfortunate event." "Unfortunate, he says," Japp muttered, crouching beside Madame Giselle's body. He squinted at the thorn, then at the blowpipe now in Poirot's gloved hand. "What's this, then? Sort of tribal nonsense. And don't tell me you were planning to use it, Poirot's eyebrows shot up in mock indignation. "Inspector, you wound me. This blowpipe, it was found beneath my seat. Yes, but I am no more its owner than you are the pilot of this aeroplane. It is, I suspect, a clue or perhaps a misdirection." Japp grunted, his skepticism palpable. "You're a suspect, too, old friend, until we sort this mess out. Don't go getting ideas about playing detective just yet." He turned to the stewards who stood nervously nearby. "You lot, round up the passengers. Nobody leaves until we've had a word with everyone." The passengers were herded into the aerodrome's waiting lounge, a drab room with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew. Poirot, ignoring Japp's warning, began his own quiet observations. The lounge was a microcosm of tension, each passenger revealing their character in subtle ways. Jane Grey sat near a window, her fingers twisting a strand of her auburn hair, her gaze flickering toward Norman Gale, who was now chatting amiably with one of the stewards as if nothing were amiss. The Countess of Horbury, her fur stole draped elegantly over her shoulders, lit a cigarette with shaking hands, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting rescue or perhaps pursuit. Daniel Clancy, still clutching his notebook, muttered to himself, his pen scratching out what Poirot suspected were less notes on the case than ideas for his next novel. The archaeologists, Armand and Jean Dupont, father and son, stood apart, their scholarly demeanor at odds with the nervous glances they exchanged. Dr. Roger Bryant, a middle-aged man with a tired face, sat quietly, his medical bag at his feet, while Venetia Kerr, an enigmatic woman with sharp features and a guarded expression, sipped tea and avoided eye contact. Japp, flanked by two constables, began the interviews, his questions blunt and to the point. "Right, let's have it," he said, addressing the group. "Who saw what? And don't give me any nonsense about not noticing anything. A woman's dead, and one of you lot knows something." The passengers' responses were a study in evasion. Jane Grey admitted to noticing Madame Giselle's stillness, but assumed she was sleeping. Norman Gale claimed he was too busy reading a dental journal to notice anything unusual. The Countess of Horbury, her voice dripping with disdain, insisted she had no interest in some Frenchwoman and had spent the flight napping. Daniel Clancy launched into a rambling tale about a wasp that had buzzed near his seat, which he swatted away, but his eyes darted nervously when Japp pressed him on whether he'd seen anyone near Giselle. The Duponts, speaking in halting English, claimed to have been engrossed in a discussion about ancient pottery, while Dr. Bryant said he'd been dozing his medical duties in Paris, having left him exhausted. Venetia Kerr, her voice clipped, admitted to seeing a steward pass by Giselle's seat but nothing more. Poirot, standing quietly to one side, listened intently, his mind cataloguing every word, every gesture. He noted the way Jane Grey's eyes lingered on Norman Gale, suggesting a budding attraction or perhaps a calculated alliance. The Countess's nervous fidgeting with her cigarette case hinted at a secret she was desperate to conceal. Clancy's obsession with the wasp seemed oddly specific, as if he were trying to divert attention, and the Duponts' scholarly detachment felt rehearsed, their glances too synchronized to be innocent. As Japp dismissed the passengers to await further questioning, Poirot approached the body once more, now laid out on a stretcher in a private room off the lounge. The thorn in Madame Giselle's neck was barely visible, but Poirot's magnifying glass revealed a faint crystalline residue around the wound. "Poison," he murmured to himself, "but of what kind, and delivered how? The blowpipe, it is too obvious, too theatrical." Japp, overhearing, snorted. "Theatrical's your style, Poirot. You're saying someone went to all this trouble to make it look like a jungle murder on a blooming aeroplane." "Precisely," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. The method it is chosen to confuse, to distract. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily misled. The blowpipe under my seat, it is a message, perhaps, or a challenge, but to whom? Japp shook his head, muttering about fancy foreign ideas. But Poirot was already lost in thought. He pictured the cabin of the Prometheus, its narrow aisles and cramped seats, the passengers moving about under the guise of fetching a drink or adjusting a coat. The blowpipe, he reasoned, could not have been used unnoticed unless it was never used at all. The thorn, so small and precise, suggested a different method, one requiring close proximity. But how had the killer approached Madame Giselle without arousing suspicion? And why had no one seen anything in a cabin where every seat faced forward, every movement visible? As the rain pattered against the lounge windows, Poirot's gaze fell on the stewards, Mitchell and Davis, who were now whispering in a corner. Mitchell, the more nervous of the two, kept glancing at the passengers, while Davis, stockier and more composed, seemed to be calming him. Poirot made a mental note to question them further. Stewards, after all, had access to every part of the cabin, their movements unremarkable to passengers accustomed to their service. The interviews resumed, and Poirot took the opportunity to speak with Jane Grey. She was a striking young woman, her auburn hair neatly styled, her expression earnest but tinged with anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "I didn't want to say in front of the others, but I did notice something odd. Just before the steward found her, I saw someone move quickly past her seat. I couldn't see who, it was just a shadow, really, but they seemed to be in a hurry." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "A shadow, Mademoiselle Grey. Most interesting. And this shadow, it moved from which direction?" "Toward the front," she said, hesitating. "But it was so fast, and I was looking at Mr. Gale for a moment." She blushed slightly, confirming Poirot's suspicion of her interest in the dentist. "Merci, Mademoiselle," Poirot said, patting her hand. "You have been most helpful. Do not fear, Hercule Poirot will find this shadow." As Jane returned to her seat, Poirot's mind raced. A shadow moving toward the front of the cabin suggested someone returning to their seat, or perhaps someone who had no business being there at all. He recalled the layout of the Prometheus, Madame Giselle in seat No. 2, near the front, with only one row ahead of her. The steward's galley was nearby, but so were the seats of the Duponts and Dr. Bryant. And then there was the wasp, that curious detail Daniel Clancy had fixated on. Was it a coincidence, or had it been placed to draw attention away from the real method of murder? Japp, meanwhile, was growing impatient. "Look here, Poirot," he said, pulling him aside. "We've got a dead woman, a poisoned dart, and a blasted blowpipe that screams, 'Look at me.' I'm betting on one of these. High-flying types having a grudge against this Giselle woman. Maybe that countess, she's got the look of someone who's hiding something, or that writer chap always scribbling like he's plotting the next crime himself." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "All are possible, Inspector, but we must not rush to judgment. The blowpipe, it is too convenient, too exotic. I suspect it is a plant, designed to make us look in the wrong direction. The truth, it lies in the details, the thorn, the wasp, the movements of the passengers. We must reconstruct the flight, moment by moment." Japp rolled his eyes. "Reconstruct all you like, Poirot, but I'm keeping an eye on you. That blow was under your seat, and I don't believe in coincidences." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Nor do we, Inspector, nor do we." As the passengers were finally allowed to leave the lounge, under strict instructions not to leave Croydon, Poirot lingered, his mind buzzing like the wasp that had so preoccupied Daniel Clancy. He pictured Madame Giselle, a woman whose wealth and power came from the secrets she held over others. Who among the passengers had a secret worth killing for? The countess, with her nervous gestures and expensive habits. Norman Gale, whose charm seemed almost too polished. Or perhaps the Duponts, whose scholarly detachment felt like a carefully constructed facade. The rain had stopped, and the sky over Croydon was clearing, revealing a pale sun that cast long shadows across the aerodrome. Poirot stepped outside, his eyes scanning the horizon as if the answers might be written in the clouds. "The truth," he murmured to himself, "it is there, in the cabin of the Prometheus, hidden among the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot, and I shall find it." The chapter closed with Poirot standing alone, the blowpipe still in his hand, its smooth surface a silent challenge. The murder of Madame Giselle was no random act, it was a performance, staged with precision and daring, and Hercule Poirot, the master of unraveling such performances, was only just beginning to take the stage. The investigation deepened as Poirot and Japp returned to the aerodrome the next morning. The Prometheus, now grounded and cordoned off, a thorough search, the blowpipe now in police custody, was being analyzed for fingerprints, though Poirot suspected it would yield little. "The killer," he told Japp, "is too clever for such an obvious mistake. The blowpipe is a prop, nothing more." Japp, ever practical, focused on the passengers' backgrounds. Madame Giselle, it turned out, was no ordinary moneylender. Her clients included some of the most prominent names in Parisian society, and her ledgers, still unlocated, were rumored to contain secrets that could ruin reputations. "Blackmail," Japp said, rubbing his chin. "That's the ticket. Someone on that plane owed her money or worse. Poirot nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The thorn in Madame Giselle's neck intrigued him. It was not a dart in the traditional sense, but a tiny organic-looking object, almost like a sliver of wood or plant matter. The residue around the wound suggested a fast-acting poison, but what kind? And how had it been delivered in a cabin where every passenger was in plain sight? He requested a private word with the stewards, Mitchell and Davis, who were now visibly shaken by the scrutiny. Mitchell, the more talkative of the two, recounted the flight in detail. The serving of coffee and sandwiches, the passengers' requests for blankets or water, the wasp that had caused a minor stir when it buzzed near Clancy's seat. "I thought it was just a nuisance," Mitchell said, wringing his hands. "I didn't think, who'd think a wasp could have anything to do with a murder?" Davis, the quietest steward, nodded in agreement. "I saw Mr. Clancy swat at it, sir. It landed on the floor near his seat. I meant to sweep it up, but then I got busy with the trays." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And tell me, Monsieur Davis, did you see anyone approach Madame Giselle's seat during the flight? Anyone who lingered, perhaps?" Davis hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Well, sir, I did see someone pass by her seat, but I didn't think much of it at the time. It was toward the end of the flight, just before we started preparing for landing. I couldn't say who it was, just a figure, moving quickly." "Quickly, you say?" Poirot pressed, as if in haste, or in secrecy. "I suppose so," Davis admitted. "But it was so fast and I was carrying a tray, I didn't get a good look." Poirot thanked the stewards and dismissed them, his mind racing. A figure moving quickly, a shadow as Jane Grey had described. The cabin of the Prometheus was small, its layout unforgiving. To approach Madame Giselle's seat without being noticed would require either boldness or familiarity as steward, perhaps, or a passenger whose movements would go unremarked. He turned his attention to the passenger's luggage, which had been searched but yielded little of note. The Countess of Horbury's bags contained an assortment of cosmetics in a silver cigarette case, but nothing incriminating. Norman Gale's suitcase held dental instruments, meticulously packed, though Poirot noted the presence of a small syringe standard for a dentist, but intriguing nonetheless. Daniel Clancy's belongings included a stack of notebooks filled with scrawled plot ideas, many featuring exotic poisons and elaborate murders. The DuPont's luggage was sparse, containing only books and maps related to their archaeological work, while Dr. Bryant's medical bag held the expected tools of his trade, including a vial of morphine that raised Japp's eyebrows but was hardly unusual for a physician. Venetia Kerr's belongings were the most enigmatic. A single suitcase with a few elegant dresses and a locked diary, which she refused to open, citing personal privacy. Poirot, ever respectful of a lady's secrets, did not press the issue, but he filed it away for later consideration. As the day wore on, Poirot and Japp met with the aerodrome staff, hoping to uncover any irregularities in the boarding process. The ticket agent, a harried woman named Mrs. Thompson, recalled checking in Madame Giselle, who had been alone and unremarkable save for her stern demeanor. "She didn't speak much," Mrs. Thompson said. "Just handed over her ticket and boarded, nothing out of the ordinary." "And the other passengers?" Poirot asked. "Did any seem nervous or out of place?" Mrs. Thompson frowned. "Well, that writer fellow Mr. Clancy, was it? He was muttering to himself as he checked in, something about a plot twist. I thought he was a bit odd, but harmless. And the Countess, she was in her right state, snapping at me when I asked for her passport, said she was in a hurry." Poirot thanked her and stepped outside, where the Prometheus loomed on the tarmac, its sleek lines now a symbol of mystery. He pictured the cabin again, the passengers in their seats, the stewards moving to and fro, the wasp, the blowpipe, thorn, all pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. And yet, Poirot knew, the truth was there, hidden in the details, waiting for his little grey cells to uncover it. That evening, as he sat in his hotel room overlooking Croydon's modest skyline, Poirot received a visitor, Jane Grey, her face pale but determined. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, twisting her hands, "I couldn't help overhearing something at the aerodrome today. One of the passengers, I won't say who, was talking in a low voice, near the lounge. They mentioned something about paying her back. I don't know if it's important, but—" Poirot leaned forward, his eyes bright. "Everything is important. Mademoiselle, tell me, this voice, was it male or female? And what was the tone?" "Male, I think," she said, hesitating. "Angry, but quiet, like they didn't want to be heard. I couldn't catch more than that." Poirot nodded, his mind already weaving connections. "You have done well, Mademoiselle Grey. Return to your hotel, and say nothing of this to anyone. Hercule Poirot will take care of the rest." Chapter 3. Whispers of Black Mouth. Air in the smoky Parisian café was thick with the scent of espresso and Galois's cigarettes, a haze that clung to the velvet curtains and the worn wooden tables. Hercule Poirot sat at a corner booth, his small fastidious hands cradling a cup of café noir, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the early hour. Across from him, Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard slouched in his chair, his tie slightly askew, a faint sheen of perspiration on his brow from the unseasonably warm October morning. The two men, old allies in the dance of justice, were joined by a third, Inspector Fournier of the Street, a lean, sharp-eyed Frenchman with a penchant for precision that rivaled Poirot's own. Madame Giselle was no ordinary Monsieur Poirot, Fournier said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the clink of cups and the murmur of patrons. He slid a thin dossier across the table, its edges worn from frequent handling. She was a spider, spinning webs of secrets across Paris and London. Her clients were not just debtors, they were victims of her knowledge. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he opened the dossier, his fingers tracing the edges of the papers within. The file was a catalogue of ruin, names, dates, sums borrowed, and most intriguingly, cryptic notes about the indiscretions that ensured repayment. A politician's affair, a businessman's embezzlement, a noblewoman's addiction. Giselle had wielded these secrets like a blade, extracting not just money but power. Formidable, Poirot murmured, his voice a soft purr of admiration and distaste. She did not lend money, Nan, she lent fear. Jab snorted, leaning forward to jab a finger at the dossier. Fear or not, someone on that plane had enough of it to kill her. That thorn in her neck, curare, the lab says. Nasty stuff, paralyzes you, stops your heart, and leaves barely a trace. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Fournier nodded, his expression grim. We found her ledgers in a safe at her Parisian office, locked tight, but one of my men is good with such things. The ledgers list debts from half the passengers on the Prometheus. The Countess of Horbury alone owed her £10,000, and that's just the start. Poirot's lips twitched beneath his mustache. The Countess, she is a woman of expensive tastes and limited means, but there are others. Nan, the Duponts perhaps, or this Monsieur Clancy with his tales of murder most foul. Jap raised an eyebrow. You've got a nose for this The Duponts, father and son, archaeologists, both in debt to Giselle for their expeditions. Then there's Venetia Kerr, some society type who borrowed a tidy sum to keep her estate afloat. Even your friend Jane Grey popped up small loan, mind you, but still. Jane Grey. Poirot's tone sharpened, though his face remained composed. A hairdresser, borrowing from such a woman. This is not logical. Fournier shrugged, lighting a cigarette and exhaling a plume of smoke. Desperation is rarely logical, monsieur. Perhaps a business venture or a personal matter. Giselle did not discriminate. She lent to anyone with a secret to hide. The conversation paused as a waiter delivered a fresh pot of coffee, his apron stained with the morning's work. Poirot's mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The Prometheus had been a microcosm of society's elite, each passenger bound by their own desires and fears, and Madame Giselle had held the strings, but which string had snapped? Across the channel, in a modest London flat, Jane Grey sat at her kitchen table, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of her auburn hair. The morning's newspaper lay open before her, its headlines screaming, "Murder in the Sky, Mystery on the Prometheus." The photograph of the airliner, sleek and silver, seemed almost mocking in its elegance. Jane's eyes lingered on the article, her heart thudding as she recalled the flight. She had been seated near the front, close enough to see Madame Giselle's severe profile, her gloved hands clutching a small black notebook. And then there was the argument Jane had overheard. A hissed exchange in the airport lounge before boarding. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She had been sipping a tepid tea, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the sight of Norman Gale, the handsome dentist who had smiled at her as they queued for the flight. But the voices had drawn her attention, sharp, urgent, and unmistakably angry. The Countess of Horbury, her furs draped dramatically over her shoulders, had been speaking to someone out of Jane's sight. "You can't keep holding this over me," the Countess had snapped, her voice low but venomous. "I'll pay, but it ends here." The response was too soft for Jane to catch, but the Countess's face had paled, her lips trembling as she turned away. Now, in the safety of her flat, Jane wondered if she should have told someone, the police, perhaps, or even Monsieur Poirot, who had looked at her with those piercing eyes when they disembarked in Croydon. She hadn't mentioned the argument then, too shaken by the discovery of Giselle's body, but the memory gnawed at her. She rose, pacing the small room, her reflection in the window showing a young woman caught in something far larger than herself. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Poirot himself, his neat figure immaculate in a tailored suit, his hat tilted at a precise angle. "Mademoiselle Grey," he said, his voice warm but edged with purpose. "May I enter? There is much to discuss, and I believe you have seen more than you have yet shared." Jane's cheeks flushed, but she stepped aside, gesturing to the cramped sitting area. "I didn't think it was important," she began, her words tumbling out, "but I heard something before the flight." The Countess, she was arguing with someone. It sounded personal. Poirot settled into a chair, his hands folded over his cane. "Personal, mademoiselle, or perhaps financial. Tell me everything, and leave nothing out. The smallest detail may be the key to this affair." As Jane recounted the overheard conversation, Poirot listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have done well to tell me this. The Countess of Horbury is a woman of many secrets, and secrets, they are dangerous things. Back in Paris, Fournier led Poirot and Japp to Madame Giselle's office, a discreet suite tucked above a milliner's shop in the Marais. The room was a study in contrasts. Elegant furniture clashed with the stark efficiency of a locked safe, its steel door gleaming under the chandelier's light. Fournier's man, a wiry locksmith named Lefebvre, had already cracked the safe, revealing a stack of ledgers bound in black leather. Each page was a meticulous record of Giselle's empire, written in her spidery hand. Poirot flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing as he cross-referenced names with the Prometheus passenger list. "Here, the Countess of Horbury," he said, tapping a line. £10,000, as you said, Monsieur Fournier, and here, Armand Dupont, 3,000 for an excavation in Persia. Jean Dupont, his son, another 2,000. Benicia Kerr, 5,000 to save her family's manor. Even Dr. Bryant, a modest sum, but significant for a man of his profession. Japp whistled softly. That's half the plane in her pocket. No wonder someone wanted her dead. But there is more, Poirot said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He held up a loose sheet tucked into the ledger's back, its edges crumpled as if hastily concealed. The note was written in a different hand, blocky and uneven. Giselle knows too much. The debt must end. No signature, no date, but the intent was clear. Fournier's eyes narrowed. A threat, or a plan? Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. Perhaps both, mon ami. This note was not meant to be found, yet it was not destroyed. Why? Because the writer was careless, or because they wished it to be seen? We must consider all possibilities. The trio spent the next hour poring over the ledgers, cross-referencing names and debts. Poirot's mind was a whirl of connections, each passenger a piece in the puzzle. The Countess, with her gambling debts and rumored affairs, was an obvious suspect, but her fear during the flight suggested she was more victim than villain. The Duponts' father and son were scholars, their debts tied to their passion for ancient ruins, hardly a motive for murder, yet their guarded demeanor hinted at more. Benicia Kerr, with her aristocratic poise, seemed desperate to maintain appearances, while Dr. Bryant's quiet reserve masked a nervousness Poirot could not ignore. And then there was Daniel Clancy, the detective novelist whose vivid imagination seemed almost too perfect a fit for the crime. His novels, filled with exotic poisons and clever disguises, mirrored the murder too closely for coincidence. Yet Clancy's nervous chatter and disheveled appearance suggested a man more at home in fiction than reality. As the afternoon waned, Poirot stepped onto the balcony overlooking the bustling Marais street below. The city hummed with life vendors calling out, bicycles rattling over cobblestones, lovers laughing in the autumn light. Yet Poirot's thoughts were elsewhere, high above in the clouds where a woman had died, her secret spilling like blood. In London, Jane Grey found herself drawn deeper into the mystery. Poirot had asked her to keep her ears open, to report anything unusual among the passengers she encountered in her work at the salon. It was a small task, but it gave her purpose, a way to quiet the unease that had settled in her chest since the flight. She had seen Norman Gale again, his easy smile and warm eyes disarming her as they chatted over coffee. He had spoken of his dental practice, his love of travel, but there was a flicker in his gaze when she mentioned the murder. A shadow that made her wonder darted the salon. The gossip was relentless. Clients whispered about the Countess of Horbury's latest scandal, her husband's absence, her rumored debts. One woman, a regular with a penchant for dramatics, claimed to have seen the Countess at a discreet pawnshop, trading a diamond brooch for cash. Jane filed the detail away, unsure if it was truth or embellishment. That evening, as she locked up the salon, a figure approached her in the dim streetlight. It was Benicia Kerr, her elegant coat buttoned tightly against the chill. "Miss Grey," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I need to speak with you. It's about the flight." Jane's pulse quickened. "What about it?" Benicia glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting to be followed. "I saw someone moving near Madame Giselle's seat. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, I'm not sure what I saw, but I'm frightened." Jane hesitated, Poirot's instructions echoing in her mind. "You should tell Monsieur Poirot. He's staying at the Savoy. He'll know what to do." Benicia nodded, her face pale. "I will, but please, don't tell anyone I spoke to you. Not yet." As Benicia vanished into the night, Jane felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She hurried home, her thoughts racing. The Prometheus had been a stage, its passengers actors in a deadly play, and she was no longer just a spectator. Back in Paris, Poirot, Japp and Fournier reconvened at the café, their table now littered with notes and coffee stains. Fournier had received a report from his men. A passenger's luggage, searched at Croydon, had contained a small, unmarked vial of liquid, its contents pending analysis. The passenger's identity was withheld, pending further investigation, but the discovery added a new layer to the case. "The vial could be the key," Japp said, rubbing his chin. "If it's curare, we've got our murder weapon." Poirot shook his head. "None, my friend. The thorn was the weapon. The curare, its poison. The vial may be a decoy, or it may belong to another. We must not leap to conclusions." Fournier leaned forward, his eyes glinting. There's something else. One of Giselle's clerks, a nervous little man, claims he overheard her on the telephone the day before the flight. She was arranging to meet someone in London, someone she called a dangerous client. Dangerous, Poirot repeated, his voice soft. And yet she boarded the Prometheus, knowing this client would be there. Courage, or arrogance, or perhaps she believed she held the upper hand. The conversation turned to the passengers' alibis, each more fragile than the last. The stewards, Henry Mitchell and Albert Davis, had been busy serving drinks and meals, their movements accounted for but not airtight. The Duponts claimed to have been engrossed in a discussion about ancient pottery, but their seats were close enough to Giselle's for a swift act. Venetia Kerr had been reading, or so she said, but her admission to Jane suggested otherwise. Dr. Bryant, the quiet physician, had been seen adjusting his medical bag mid-flight, a detail that piqued Poirot's interest. As the evening drew to a close, Poirot stood, his small frame radiating determination. Mies Amos, we are close, but not close enough. The truth lies in the shadows of these secrets, in the whispers of blackmail that bound Madame Giselle to a killer. Money or love, these are the roots of murder, and we shall dig until we find them. He tipped his hat, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase, and stepped into the Parisian night, leaving Jap and Fournier to exchange a glance of weary admiration. The little Belgian was in his element, and the truth, however elusive, could not hide from him for long. The next morning Poirot visited the curio shop where the blowpipe had been purchased, a cramped, dusty establishment on the left bank. The owner, a wizened man with a penchant for theatrics, claimed to have sold the item to a foreign gentleman months earlier, but his description was vague. Tall, dark-haired, possibly English. Poirot's questions were met with shrugs, but a receipt tucked in a ledger bore a name, Daniel Clancy. Clancy, Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing the receipt. The novelist who writes of poisoned darts and silent deaths. Is he a fool, or a genius playing the fool? Back in London, Jap was pursuing a different lead. The Countess of Horbury had been spotted at a nightclub the evening before the flight. Her behavior erratic, her companions unsavory. A bartender recalled her arguing with a man in a private booth, their voices raised over the jazz band's wail. The man's face was hidden, but his accent was distinctly French, a detail that sent Jap racing to inform Poirot. Meanwhile, Jane Grey continued her quiet surveillance, her days at the salon filled with chatter that bordered on revelation. A client mentioned seeing Norman Gale at a chemist shop, purchasing a vial of something medicinal just days before the flight. The detail was innocuous, yet it lingered in Jane's mind, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. As the days passed, the investigation deepened, each clue a thread in the tapestry of deceit. Poirot moved between Paris and London, his mind a whirl of names, motives, and secrets. The ledgers, the note, the vial, the blowpipe hole pointed to a killer who had planned meticulously, yet left just enough to be caught. Was it arrogance, or a cry for discovery? In a quiet moment, Poirot stood by the Seine, the river's surface reflecting the grey sky. He thought of Madame Giselle, her life built on the weaknesses of others, her death a testament to their desperation. You knew too much, madame, he whispered, but you did not know enough. The chapter closed with Poirot returning to his hotel, a telegram from Jap waiting. Vial contains cure. Passenger identified. Meet me in London. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his heart quickening. The net was tightening, and the truth, like the Prometheus itself, was about to land. Chapter 4. The Wasps Sting. The Prometheus, now grounded in Croydon, stood like a silent witness to the chaos that had unfolded within its sleek, silver fuselage. The airliner's once polished interior, with its plush seats and gleaming fixtures, seemed dimmed by the shadow of Madame Giselle's death. Hercule Poirot, his air-sickness mercifully subsided, stood near the plane's entrance, his sharp eyes scanning the cabin where the crime had occurred. The hum of police activity buzzed around him, constables murmuring, Inspector Jap barking orders, and the air stewards, Henry Mitchell and Albert Davis, hovering nervously by the galley. The discovery of the blowpipe under Poirot's own seat had cast an uncomfortable spotlight on him, but his mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments of this airborne enigma. The dead wasp swatted by the detective novelist Daniel Clancy lay at the heart of his thoughts. Was it a mere coincidence, or something more sinister? Poirot adjusted his immaculate tie, his mustache twitching as he considered the passengers. Each had been questioned, their stories dissected by Jap's gruff pragmatism and Poirot's relentless precision. The flirtatious Jane Grey, with her bright eyes and quick smile, had seemed shaken but cooperative. Norman Gale, the dashing dentist, exuded charm but carried a faint air of unease. The haughty Countess of Horbury, her elegant fingers trembling as she clutched her cigarette case, had deflected questions with practiced disdain. The archaeologists, Armand and Jean Dupont, father and son, spoke with scholarly detachment, yet their eyes darted nervously. Venetia Kerr, the poised aristocrat, had been tight-lipped, her gaze betraying a flicker of fear. Dr. Roger Bryant, reserved and professional, answered curtly, while Daniel Clancy rambled about fictional poisons with unsettling enthusiasm. And then there was the wasp, a tiny, lifeless clue that seemed to mock them all. Inspector Japp strode over, his heavy footsteps echoing in the cabin. "Well, Poirot, you've got us in a right mess," he said, his voice a mix of exasperation and grudging respect. "A blowpipe under your seat, a dead moneylender, and now this blasted wasp. What's your game, eh? Got any of those little grey cells working yet?" Poirot's eyes twinkled, undeterred by Japp's skepticism. "Mon ami, the game is not mine, but that of the murderer. The wasp, I think, is no accident. It is a thread in the tapestry, and we must follow it." Japp snorted. "A thread? It's a dead bug, Poirot." Clancy swatted it, said it was buzzing around his face, probably just a nuisance from the open window, before takeoff. "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his voice soft but firm. "But consider, Inspector, why a wasp? Why in this cabin, at this moment? And why does Monsieur Clancy, a man who writes of poisons and daggers, find himself so conveniently near this insect?" Japp's brow furrowed. "You think Clancy's involved? He's a bit of an odd duck, I'll grant you, but he's no killer. Writes about murders, doesn't commit Poirot raised a finger. "The mind of a novelist, Inspector, is a labyrinth. He imagines death in 1,000 ways. Perhaps one of those ways became real." Japp shook his head, unconvinced, and turned to summon the stewards. Henry Mitchell, a wiry man with a perpetually anxious expression, approached first, followed by Albert Davis, whose round face was flushed with nerves. Poirot studied them closely, noting the way Mitchell's hands fidgeted and Davis's eyes avoided contact. "Gentlemen," Poirot began, his tone measured, "you were both serving on the flight. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual near Madame Giselle's seat? A passenger who lingered, perhaps a movement out of place?" Mitchell cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. "Well, sir, it's hard to say. We were busy, you see, serving drinks, checking tickets. I did see someone move toward the front of the cabin, near C2, but I couldn't swear who it was. It was quick, like a shadow passing." Davis nodded eagerly, as if relieved to share the burden. "I saw something similar. I was clearing trays, and I thought someone stood up near the front, maybe to stretch their legs. But it was so fast, and with the engine noise, I didn't think much of it." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And this shadow, messieurs, did it carry anything? A pipe, perhaps? Or did you see the wasp near Madame Giselle?" Both stewards shook their heads. "No pipe, sir," Mitchell said. "And the wasp, well, I saw Mr. Clancy swatting at it, but that was earlier, before we noticed her." Davis added, "It was buzzing near the window, annoying a few passengers. Mr. Clancy got it with his newspaper. Right proud of himself, he was." Poirot nodded, dismissing them with a polite wave. As they retreated, he turned to Japp. "A shadow near the victim, a wasp swatted by a novelist, and a blowpipe under my seat. The pieces, they begin to form a picture." Japp crossed his arms. "If you say so. But I'm more interested in that thorn in her neck. The lab's working on it, some kind of poison, no doubt. South American, maybe. That blow got to be the key," perhaps, Poirot mused. "But the blowpipe is too obvious, too crude. It screams for attention, as if placed to be found. The wasp, however, it is subtle, it whispers." Japp rolled his eyes. "Whispers. Screams. What's next, Poirot?" "The plane's upholstery, confessing. I'm off to check the passenger luggage. You stick to your whispers." As Japp marched off, Poirot returned to the cabin, his eyes drawn to seat No. 12, where Daniel Clancy had sat. The novelist, with his disheveled hair and ink-stained fingers, had been both cooperative and evasive during questioning. His tales of fictional poison darts tipped with curare venom distilled from rare plants had been oddly specific, almost as if he were boasting. Poirot approached the seat, running his fingers along the armrest. A faint smudge of newsprint caught his eye, likely from Clancy's swatting spree. He crouched, inspecting the floor, and found a tiny speck of yellow, another fragment of the wasp's shattered body. He carefully lifted the speck with a handkerchief, holding it to the light. "You, mon petit ami, are no ordinary insect," he murmured. "You were placed here, I think, to distract or to deceive." Poirot's mind churned. The wasp could be a red herring, designed to mislead, but its presence felt deliberate. Had someone planted it to create confusion? Or was it a clue to the method of murder? The thorn in Madame Giselle's neck suggested a poisoned dart, yet the blowpipe's discovery under his own seat seemed too convenient. A frame, perhaps. But why him? And why a wasp? He straightened, his gaze sweeping the cabin. The passengers had been herded to a nearby hangar for further questioning, but Poirot lingered, reconstructing the flight in his mind. The Prometheus had been at cruising altitude, the cabin cramped but orderly. Madame Giselle, seated near the front, had been alive for most of the flight, her stern face betraying no fear. Yet some time before landing, she had slumped, unnoticed by all, until the steward's final check. The killer had moved with precision, unseen in a cabin full of eyes. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by Jane Grey's arrival. The young hairdresser, her auburn curls slightly askew, approached with a tentative smile. "Monsieur Poirot, I hope I'm not intruding. I can't stop thinking about it. That poor woman, dead right in front of us." Poirot inclined his head, his expression softening. "Mademoiselle, your concern does you credit. Tell me, during the flight, Did you notice anything unusual? A passenger who seemed out of place, perhaps? Jane hesitated, her fingers twisting. A handkerchief. I was distracted. You see, Norman, Mr. Gale was so kind, and we were chatting, but I do remember the wasp. It was buzzing near my seat, and Mr. Clancy swatted it. He made a little joke about it. Something about slaying the beast. Everyone laughed, but it felt odd. Odd, Mademoiselle Poirot's eyes gleamed. In what way? Well, Jane said, frowning. He seemed almost too pleased with himself, like he wanted everyone to notice him swatting it. And then, when the steward found Madame Giselle, he went quiet, like he was, I don't know, nervous. Poirot nodded, filing the observation away. And Monsieur Gale, did he too notice this wasp? Jane blushed slightly. Norman. Oh, he was busy talking to me. I don't think he paid much attention to it. But he did mention later that he thought the blowpipe was strange. He said it looked like something from one of his dental journals. Of all things, Poirot's eyebrows rose. Dental journals, you say? Most interesting. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As Jane departed, Poirot's mind raced. Norman Gale's mention of dental journals was curious. Could a dentist's tools, needles perhaps, or syringes be linked to the thorn? And Clancy's theatrical wasp-slaying, had it been a performance to divert attention? The cabin, with its tight confines, offered little room for secrecy, yet the killer had struck invisibly. The wasp, the blowpipe, the thorn all were pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. Poirot made his way to the hangar, where the passengers sat in uneasy silence. Japp's men were rifling through luggage, their searches yielding little but complaints. The Countess of Horbury, her fur coat draped over a chair, lit another cigarette, her eyes darting toward the door. Venetia Kerr sat stiffly, her aristocratic poise broken but strained. The Duponts whispered to each other in French, their faces pale. Dr. Bryant adjusted his glasses, his calm demeanor unshaken, while Clancy scribbled furiously in a notebook, muttering to himself, Norman Gale, ever. The gentleman offered Jane a reassuring smile, though his hands betrayed a slight tremble. Poirot approached Clancy, who looked up with a start. Monsieur Clancy, Poirot said, his voice smooth. You are a man of imagination, Nan. Tell me, this wasp, why did you swat it with such enthusiasm? Clancy blinked, his pen pausing. Enthusiasm? Oh, I suppose I did make a bit of a show. It was just a nuisance, buzzing about. I write about dramatic things. You know, murder, intrigue. Swatting a wasp felt like a tiny adventure. An adventure, Poirot repeated, his tone neutral. And in your stories, monsieur, do wasps ever play a role in murder? Clancy laughed nervously. Well, not wasps specifically, but I've written about poisoned darts, secret toxins, you know, the usual stuff. Pure fiction. Of course, Poirot said, his smile enigmatic. And yet, here we are, with a poisoned thorn and a blowpipe. Most curious. Nan. Clancy's laughter faded, his eyes flickering with unease. You don't think I had anything to do with it, do you? I'm just a writer. Poirot waved a hand dismissively. A writer, yes, but a writer with a keen eye for detail. Tell me, did you see anyone near Madame Giselle's seat during the flight? Clancy hesitated, his fingers tightening around his pen. I don't know. It was all so quick. I was focused on the wasp, you see. But maybe someone moved toward the front. I can't be sure. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and moved on to Norman Gale. The dentist stood as Poirot approached, his smile polite but guarded. Monsieur Gale, Poirot began, Mademoiselle Gray tells me you mentioned a blowpipe in a dental journal. This is most intriguing. Tell me more. Gale's smile faltered. Oh, that's just a passing thought. I read an article once about tribal tools, blowpipes, darts, that sort of thing. It reminded me of the one they found. Pure coincidence, I'm sure. Coincidence, Poirot echoed, his eyes narrowing. In my experience, monsieur, coincidences are rare. And your profession, dentistry, it involves needles, perhaps. Tools that could deliver a precise prick. Gale's face reddened. Are you suggesting I poisoned that woman? I'm a dentist, not a murderer. I was nowhere near her seat. Tom, yourself, Monsieur Poirot said soothingly. I merely seek the truth. You were seated near Mademoiselle Gray, yes. Did you perhaps notice this wasp that so fascinated Monsieur Clancy? Gale relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained wary. The wasp, yes. I saw it buzzing around. Clancy made a big fuss about killing it. I didn't think much of it, thought it was just a pest. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing every word. As he stepped away, he caught the Countess of Horbury watching him, her cigarette trembling in her hand. He approached her, his manner deferential but probing. Madame la Comtesse, you seem distressed. This affair, it troubles you, Nan. The Countess exhaled a plume of smoke, her eyes cold. Of course it troubles me, Monsieur Poirot. A woman was murdered practically in front of me. And now all these questions, it's tiresome. Tiresome, perhaps, Poirot said, but necessary. Madame Giselle, she was known to you, I think. A woman of influence in certain circles. The Countess's face tightened. I don't know what you mean. I barely knew her. She was just another passenger. Poirot tilted his head, his voice gentle but insistent. And yet, madame, your hands they shake, your eyes. they avoid mine. If there is something you wish to share, it is better to do so now. The Countess stubbed out her cigarette, her lips a thin line. I have nothing to say, monsieur. Leave me alone. Poirot bowed slightly and withdrew, but not before noting the flicker of panic in her eyes. The Countess was hiding something, perhaps a connection to Giselle's blackmail. He made a mental note to press her further, but for now, his attention returned to the wasp. Back at the plane, Poirot enlisted a constable to collect the remaining fragments of the insect. The tiny corpse, now in a small evidence bag, seemed almost comical in its insignificance, yet Poirot treated it with the gravity of a key exhibit. He examined it under a magnifying glass borrowed from Jap, noting the delicate wings and the faint residue on its body. Was it poisoned dust from the plane, or something else entirely? As evening fell, Poirot and Jap reconvened at Scotland Yard, the evidence laid out before them, the blowpipe, the thorn, the wasp fragments. Jap rubbed his temples, his patience wearing thin. I don't get it, Poirot. The lab says the thorn. What's coated in a rare poison curare, they think, fast-acting, deadly, in small doses. But how did it get into her neck? A blowpipe in a crowded cabin. It's madness. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Madness, perhaps, but method. Inspector, the blowpipe is a distraction. I am certain. It was placed to confuse, to point fingers perhaps at me. But the wasp is the key. It was seen, it was swatted, it was remembered. Why? Jap groaned. You're obsessed with that bug. What's it got to do with anything? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Everything, mon ami. The wasp was not on the plane by chance. It was brought aboard, or it was used. I suspect it was a signal, a diversion, or perhaps a delivery. Delivery? Jap's jaw dropped. You're saying someone used a wasp to poison her? That's insane. Not insane, Poirot said softly. Clever, but we must prove it. Tomorrow we speak again to Monsieur Clancy, to Mademoiselle Gray, to all of them, and we must find the source of this wasp. The chapter drew to a close, with Poirot alone in his hotel room, the evidence bag on his desk. He held the wasp's tiny corpse to the light, his voice a whisper. You, mon ami, are no accident. You are the sting that reveals the truth. The mystery deepened, the wasp's role still unclear, but Poirot's certainty grew. The killer had woven a web of deception, but the little gray cells were closing in. Chapter 5. Secrets in the Sky. Hercule Poirot sat in his temporary office at Croydon Aerodrome, a cramped room smelling faintly of aviation fuel and stale coffee. The hum of departing planes vibrated through the thin walls, a constant reminder of the Prometheus, the luxurious airliner where Madame Giselle had met her untimely end. Poirot's delicate fingers traced the edge of a notepad where he'd sketched a rough layout of the aircraft's cabin. His little gray cells, as he so fondly called them, were alight with a puzzle before him. A murder committed in a crowded cabin at 10,000 feet, unseen by all but the killer. The challenge was intoxicating. The morning light streamed through a small window, catching the dust motes in the air. Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the passenger list pinned to a corkboard. Each name was a thread in a tangled web. Jane Grey, the spirited young hairdresser. Norman Gale, the charming dentist. The haughty Countess of Horbury. Venetia Kerr, the poised aristocrat. Daniel Clancy, the eccentric novelist. The archaeologists, Armand and Jean Dupont, Dr. Roger Bryant, and the stewards, Henry Mitchell and Albert Davis. Somewhere among them, more perhaps in their unseen connections, lay the key to Madame Giselle's death. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Inspector Jap, his face as weathered as the leather chair he slumped into, entered with a grimace. Poirot, this case is a nightmare. The press is crawling all over Croydon, spinning tales of poisoned darts and international spies. And that blowpipe under your seat, blimey, it's got the Yard in a tizzy. Poirot's mustache twitched with a hint of a smile. Mon ami, the press loves a spectacle, but we seek only the truth. The blowpipe, it is a distraction, perhaps, but a clever one. We must focus on the movements of our passengers. Tell me, what have you learned? Jap tossed a file onto the desk. Not much to cheer you up. The thorn in Giselle's neck. The lab says it's coated with a rare South American poison curare. They think paralyzes the victim in minutes. But how it got there, in a cabin full of people, is beyond me and the passengers. They're a cagey lot. Nobody saw anything, or so they claim. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. Nobody saw anything, yet everybody saw something. Inspector, the truth lies in what was not seen, or what was seen and not understood. Let us reconstruct the flight's timeline. Yes, every step, every glance, every moment. Jap groaned, but nodded, pulling out a notebook. Together they began to map the fateful flight of the Prometheus. The airliner, a marvel of modern engineering, had a narrow cabin with 2 rows of seats, each holding a mix of luxury and practicality. Madame Giselle had occupied seat No. 2, near the front, close to the steward's galley. Poirot, in seat No. 9, had a clear view of the cabin's center. The Countess of Horbury sat in seat No. 13 across the aisle, her nervous fidgeting noted by several passengers. Jane Grey and Norman Gale, in seats No. 16 and No. 17, had been engrossed in flirtatious banter. Venetia Kerr, in seat No. 11, had been reading, her calm demeanor unshaken until now. Poirot tapped the sketch. The blowpipe found under my seat suggests a deliberate attempt to mislead. But let us consider the movements. Madame Giselle was alive when the steward, Henry Mitchell, served coffee at 11:15 a.m. By 11:45 when Albert Davis checked the cabin, she was dead. 30 minutes, Inspector, in a cabin where no one could move unseen. Or could they? Jap rubbed his chin. The stewards were busy. Mitchell was in the galley most of the time, and Davis was up and down the aisle. The passengers were seated, except for a few trips to the lavatory. But nobody lingered near Giselle's seat, at least. Not that anyone admits. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Not that anyone admits precisely. Let us speak with Mademoiselle Venetia Kerr. Her seat No. 11 gave her a view of Madame Giselle. Perhaps she saw more than she has said. An hour later, Venetia Kerr sat across from Poirot in the Aerodrome's lounge, her posture as rigid as the tailored lines of her tweed suit. Her dark eyes met Poirot's with a mix of curiosity and caution. Monsieur Poirot, I've told Inspector Jap all I know. I was reading during the flight. I didn't notice anything unusual. Poirot tilted his head, his voice soft but probing. Mademoiselle, the eyes see even when the mind is elsewhere. A shadow, a movement, a gesture, something caught your attention, did it not? Near Madame Giselle's seat, perhaps. Venetia's fingers tightened around her handbag. For a moment, she hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. I didn't want to seem hysterical. But yes, I saw someone move, toward the front of the cabin, near Madame Giselle. It was quick, almost fleeting. I thought they were heading to the lavatory, but they paused only for a second near her seat. Poirot leaned forward, his voice a velvet trap. And this figure, mademoiselle? A man, a woman, tall or short? Venetia shook her head. I couldn't tell. The cabin was dim, and they wore a coat, a long one, with a high collar. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was afraid to speak up. After all, what could I prove? Poirot's smile was gentle but unyielding. You have proved more than you know, mademoiselle. A shadow that pauses is no accident. Mercy as Venetia left. Jap muttered, a shadowy figure. That's not much to go on, Poirot. Could have been anyone, or it could be everything, Poirot replied, his eyes distant. We must now consider the Countess of Horbury. Her nervousness, her debts to Madame Giselle. There is a connection. I think the Countess of Horbury was a vision of elegance, even in distress. Her silk dress clung to her frame as she sat in Poirot's office, her painted nails drumming on the armrest. Her beauty was undeniable, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Monsieur Poirot, this is absurd. I barely knew Madame Giselle. Why would I harm her? Poirot's voice was calm, almost soothing. Madame, you were seen arguing in Paris before the flight. A heated exchange, and Madame Giselle. She held your debts that could ruin a woman of your position. The Countess's face paled, but her voice remained sharp. I don't deny I owed her money, but murder? That's preposterous. I was in my seat the entire flight, except to powder my nose. Ask the stewards. Poirot's mustache quivered slightly. And yet, madame, your habitual dependence on certain substances might have made you desperate. Madame Giselle, ledgers, they could expose more than debts, could they not? Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she seemed on the verge of collapse. Then she straightened, her voice icy. You have no proof, monsieur, none. As she swept out, Jap whistled. She's hiding something, Poirot. But murder? I'm not so sure. Poirot's gaze lingered on the door. She is afraid, Inspector, and fear is a powerful motive. But we must look beyond the obvious. Let us visit the Parisian office of Madame Giselle. The journey to Paris was swift, a blur of trains and taxis. Madame Giselle's office, tucked in a discreet corner of the Marais, was a study in contrasts, opulent furnishings paired with locked cabinets and a faint air of menace. Fournier, the discreet detective, met Poirot and Jap at the door, his thin face etched with exhaustion. We've gone through her files, he said, handing Poirot a leather-bound ledger. Giselle was meticulous. Every client, every debt, every secret, she kept it all. Poirot flipped through the pages, his fingers pausing on a name. Tien's, Inspector, one of our passengers, a connection to Madame Giselle. Hidden until now, this is no coincidence. Jap leaned over, squinting. Who is it? Poirot closed the ledger with a snap. For now, let us keep this close. Mon ami, the web is delicate, and we must not break it too soon. Back in London, Poirot summoned Jane Grey. The young hairdresser arrived, her eyes bright with curiosity. Monsieur Poirot, have you found something? I can't stop thinking about that poor woman. Poirot regarded her warmly. Mademoiselle, your observations on the flight were most helpful. Tell me, did you notice anything else, perhaps a passenger who seemed out of place? Jane frowned, her brow furrowing. Well, there was one thing. I saw Daniel Clancy, the writer, fiddling with something in his pocket. I thought it was a pen, but it looked odd, like a thin tube. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A tube, you say? Most interesting. And where was Monsieur Clancy seated? Seat No. 4, Jane replied, not far from Madame Giselle. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The blowpipe, the wasp, the shadowy figure, each piece was a fragment of a larger truth. He stood, pacing the small office, his hands clasped behind his back. The cabin of the Prometheus. It is a stage, mademoiselle, and on this stage, someone played a deadly role, but who and why? As Jane left, Poirot returned to his sketch of the cabin. He drew a line from seat no to 2 seat no, then to seat no 11. The answer lies in what was not seen, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the drone of a passing plane. But I, Hercule Poirot, will see it. The day wore on, and Poirot's inquiries deepened. He interviewed the stewards again, pressing them on every detail. Henry Mitchell, the senior steward, recalled a passenger dropping a handkerchief near Giselle's seat, a small detail, but one Poirot seized upon. A handkerchief, monsieur. Describe it. Mitchell shrugged. White lacy, looked expensive. I picked it up and returned it to the lady in seat no. 13th, the countess. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet the countess claims she never left her seat, except to the lavatory. Interesting, Nan. Albert Davis, the youngest steward, added another piece. I saw a man, I think, linger near the galley just before I found Madame Giselle. He was quick, like he didn't want to be seen. Poirot's mind whirred. The galley was near seat no to a man, a woman, a shadow, each account added to the mosaic. He thanked the stewards and returned to his notes, his pencil sketching arrows and circles. The wasp swatted by Daniel Clancy. They've remained a nagging detail. Was it a distraction, as he suspected, or something more? That evening Poirot met Fournier at a quiet cafe in Soho. The Frenchman sipped his wine, his expression grim. Poirot, we've traced the poison. Corari is rare in Europe, but a shipment was reported missing from a London medical supplier. The buyer, anonymous, paid in cash. Poirot's mustache curled. A medical supplier, you say? And our good Dr. Bryant, he is a physician. Nan. And Monsieur Gale, a dentist, both with access to such substances. Fournier nodded. But the blowpipe, it's so theatrical. Why not a syringe, or poison in her coffee? Because, mon ami, Poirot said, leaning back, the killer wished to confuse. The blowpipe is a lie, meant to point us to savagery, to exotic lands. But I suspect the truth is closer to home. As night fell, Poirot stood alone in his office. The cabin sketch spread before him. He traced the lines again, his mind weaving through the possibilities. The countess's fear, Venetia's shadow, Clancy's tube, the missing curare, each was a thread, but the pattern was incomplete. He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells work. Suddenly a memory sparked. Jane Grey's words, a tube in Clancy's pocket. Poirot's eyes snapped open. He grabbed the passenger list, his finger stopping on seat no. For mon Dieu, he whispered. It is possible, but no, I must be certain. He sketched the cabin again, this time marking every passenger's line of sight. The galley, the lavatory, the seat's each position offered a clue. The killer had moved unseen, or so they thought. But someone had seen a glance, a shadow, a pause. Poirot's pencil hovered over seat no 11. Venetia Kerr's hesitation. Her fear, it was not cowardice, it was knowledge. He stood, his decision made. Tomorrow, we gather them all, he said to the empty room. The truth will not hide in the clouds much longer. The chapter drew to a close as Poirot folded the sketch, his voice a quiet promise. The answer lies in what was not seen. The stage was set for the next act, the truth hovering just out of reach, waiting for Poirot's relentless mind to seize it. Chapter 6. The inquest's drama. The coroner's court in Croydon buzzed with a restless energy. Its wooden benches packed with reporters, curious locals, and the anxious passengers of the Prometheus, each summoned to testify about the death of Madame Giselle. The room, though modest, carried an air of grandeur under the weight of the occasion, a high-profile murder case aboard an airliner, a scandal ripe for the headlines. Dust motes danced in the slanting sunlight streaming through tall windows, and the faint hum of whispered conversations filled the air, punctuated by the occasional scrape of a chair or the rustle of notepads. Hercule Poirot sat near the front, his small, fastidious frame upright, his hands folded neatly over the silver head of his cane. His sharp eyes, though, betrayed no hint of the airsickness that had plagued him on the flight. They darted from face to face, cataloguing every nervous tick and fleeting glance among the gathered suspects. The coroner, a wiry man with a pinched face and spectacles perched precariously on his nose, called the inquest to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. His voice, dry and precise, cut through the murmurs. We are here to ascertain the cause of death of Madame Marie Giselle, found deceased aboard the Prometheus airliner on its journey from Paris to Croydon. Let us proceed with the evidence. Inspector Japp, seated to Poirot's left, leaned over and muttered, "This'll be a circus, Poirot. Half these people are lying through their teeth, and the other half are too scared to tell the truth." Poirot's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles, but he said nothing, his attention fixed on the first witness being called, Henry Mitchell, the senior steward of the Prometheus. Mitchell, a lanky man with a perpetually harried expression, took the stand, smoothing his uniform as if it could steady his nerves. Under the coroner's questioning, He recounted the flight's routine, the serving of coffee, the distribution of blankets, the passengers' complaints about the cabin's chill. His voice faltered when he reached the moment of discovery. I was doing my rounds, sir, checking on the passengers, when I noticed Madame Giselle. She was slumped, like she was asleep, but her head was at an odd angle. I called her name, touched her shoulder, and well, she didn't move. That's when I knew. The coroner pressed. And you saw nothing unusual before this? No one near her seat, no disturbances? Mitchell hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the passengers seated in the gallery. Well, sir, it's hard to say. The cabin was busy, people moving about, asking for drinks or pillows. I did see one passenger linger near her seat earlier, but I couldn't swear to who it was. It was just a glance. You see, Poirot's fingers tightened slightly on his cane. A glance, he thought. How convenient, and how vague. He made a mental note to revisit Mitchell's testimony later. For the steward's uncertainty felt less like confusion and more like a careful sidestep. Next came Albert Davis, the junior steward, whose round face glistened with sweat despite the cool room. His account mirrored Mitchell's but added a curious detail. There was a wasp, sir, buzzing about the cabin, annoying the passengers. Mr. Clancy, the writer fellow, was swatting at it, making a fuss. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it was odd, wasn't it, with what happened? The coroner raised an eyebrow. A wasp? And you believe this relevant to Madame Giselle's death? Davis flushed, stammering, I don't know, sir. Just something I noticed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The wasp again. That persistent insect, swatted by Daniel Clancy, seemed to hover at the edges of this mystery, its presence too conspicuous to be mere coincidence. He glanced at Clancy, who sat slouched in his seat, his tweed jacket rumpled, his fingers nervously twisting a pencil. The detective novelist's eyes darted about as if he were plotting a story rather than living one. The coroner called Jane Grey next, and the young hairdresser stepped forward, her posture rigid but her voice steady. She described her seat near the rear of the cabin, her fleeting glances at Norman Gale, and her lack of interaction with Madame Giselle. I didn't know her, Jane said, her hands clasped tightly. I only noticed her because she seemed so dignified, sitting there alone. I didn't see anything strange until the steward started shouting. The coroner nodded, but a reporter in the back row scribbled furiously, his pencil scratching loud enough to draw Poirot's attention. The press, Poirot noted, was already weaving a narrative of glamour and intrigue, casting Jane as the innocent ingenue and Giselle as the shadowy victim of a high society plot. He found their eagerness tiresome but useful. Public scrutiny often flushed out truths that suspects preferred to hide. Norman Gale, the dentist, followed Jane to the stand. His boyish charm was dimmed by the gravity of the setting, but he spoke with a practiced ease that Poirot found almost too polished. I was reading a journal on dental surgery, Gale said, and barely looked up during the flight. I didn't know Madame Giselle, and I certainly didn't see anyone near her seat. His smile faltered under the coroner's scrutiny, and Poirot noted a faint sheen of perspiration on his brow. Yet you were seated close to her, the coroner said, consulting his notes. Did you not notice the wasp Mr. Davis mentioned? Gale hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I saw it. It was buzzing near my seat. I ignored it, thought it was just a nuisance. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Gale's casual dismissal of the wasp felt rehearsed, as if he had anticipated the question. The dentist's hands, resting on the stand, were steady, but his left thumb twitched a small betrayal of nerves. The Countess of Horbury's testimony was a spectacle in itself. Cicely Horbury swept to the stand in a cloud of perfume and defiance, her silk dress rustling as she adjusted her hat with a practiced flick. Her beauty was undeniable, but her eyes were shadowed, and her voice carried a brittle edge. I was in seat 13, she said, her tone clipped. I spent most of the flight reading a novel. I didn't know Madame Giselle, and I certainly didn't see anything suspicious. The coroner's voice sharpened. You were aware, Lady Horbury, of Madame Giselle's reputation as a moneylender. The Countess froze, her lips parting slightly before she recovered. I'd heard of her. Yes, who hasn't? But I had no dealings with her. Poirot's mustache twitched. A lie, he thought, or at least a half-truth. The Countess's fingers, adorned with glittering rings, clutched her handbag too tightly, and her gaze avoided Poirot's. He recalled Jane Grey's mention of overhearing a heated exchange involving the Countess before the flight, a detail he intended to pursue. The DuPont's father and son archaeologists took the stand together, their testimonies nearly identical in their blandness. Armand DuPont, the elder, spoke of their work excavating Mesopotamian ruins, claiming he and Jean were too absorbed in discussing pottery shards to notice anything amiss. Jean, younger and more nervous, echoed his father but stumbled when asked about the blowpipe found under Poirot's seat. I didn't see it, Jean said, his voice cracking. But it's strange, isn't it? A blowpipe on a plane. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Jean's discomfort was telling, though whether it stemmed from guilt or mere anxiety, he could not yet say. The DuPont's insistence on their ignorance felt too emphatic, as if they were shielding something or someone. Venetia Kerr, the enigmatic aristocrat, was called next. Her testimony was brief but laced with a quiet intensity. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, she said, her voice low and measured. But I did notice Madame Giselle seemed preoccupied. She kept glancing at her handbag, as if she were expecting something. The coroner pressed, and you saw no one approach. Her Venetia hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the gallery. Not clearly, it was a crowded cabin, and people were moving about, but I thought I saw someone pause near her seat just for a moment. Poirot's heart quickened. Venetia's reluctance mirrored Mitchell's vagueness, but her observation carried weight. A shadowy figure, a fleeting positiles that could unlock the puzzle if he could only clarify them. The final witness was Daniel Clancy, the detective novelist whose nervous energy seemed to fill the room. He clutched a tattered notebook, his fingers stained with ink, and spoke in a rush. I was working on a plot idea: murder by poison dart. Actually, quite a coincidence, isn't it? He laughed, a high, strained sound that drew raised eyebrows from the coroner. I swatted that wasp because it was buzzing in my face. I didn't think it meant anything until we found her. The coroner's voice grew stern, and the blowpipe, Mr. Clancy. It was found under Mr. Poirot's seat, but you were seated nearby. Did you see anything? Clancy's eyes widened, and he shook his head vigorously. Nothing, I swear. I was lost in my notes. But it's fascinating, isn't it? A blowpipe, a dart, it's like something out of one of my books. Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. Clancy's enthusiasm for the crime's theatricality was either genuine or a clever mask. The novelist's stories, with their poisoned darts and exotic murders, were too close to the truth for comfort. The coroner paused the proceedings to allow the medical examiner to present his findings. Dr. Roger Bryant, who had been a passenger on the flight, was called to corroborate the report. His testimony was clinical but chilling. Madame Giselle had died from a fast-acting poison, likely delivered by the thorn found in her neck. The residue on the thorn suggests a curare-like substance, Bryant said, adjusting his glasses. It's rare, possibly South American in origin. Death would have been almost instantaneous. A murmur rippled through the room, and a reporter shouted, "South American poison. Like something from the jungle." The coroner silenced him with a glare, but the question lingered, stoking Poirot's curiosity. Curare was not a common weapon. Its presence suggested a killer with access to exotic means and a motive strong enough to risk such a bold method. The inquest took a dramatic turn when the coroner addressed the blowpipe's discovery. "Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice heavy with suspicion, "this weapon was found under your seat. Can you explain its presence?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Poirot. He rose slowly, his movements deliberate, his expression serene. "Despite the weight of the accusation, Monsieur," he began, his voice calm but resonant, "I am as puzzled as you are. The blowpipe was not mine, nor did I see it placed there. But I assure you, I, Hercule Poirot, do not commit murder in so clumsy a fashion. The blowpipe is a clue, yes, but it is also a distraction, a crude attempt to cast suspicion." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, but the coroner's frown deepened. "A distraction, you say? Yet you were in a position to observe the victim. Did you see nothing suspicious?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "I saw everything, monsieur, and nothing. The truth lies in the details that others overlook. I am content to wait for those details to reveal themselves." The coroner seemed unsatisfied but moved on, calling for closing statements. Japp, as the investigating officer, summarized the evidence: a poisoned thorn, a blowpipe, a dead wasp, and a cabin full of passengers with secrets. "We're dealing with a clever killer," Japp said, his voice grim. "Someone who planned this down to the last detail." The coroner adjourned the inquest without a verdict, citing the need for further investigation. "This is no simple crime," he declared. "The evidence is inconclusive, and the circumstances are extraordinary. We will reconvene when more facts are known." As the room emptied, Poirot remained seated, his fingers tracing the edge of his cane. Japp approached, his expression a mix of frustration and amusement. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he said. "All this drama, and you sitting there like a cat with a bowl of cream." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The truth, my friend, is close, but not yet mine. The inquest has shown me the players, but not the game. We must look deeper into the hearts, not just the seats." Jane Grey lingered nearby, her face pale, but determined. "Mr. Poirot," she said softly, "do you really think the blowpipe was a trick? It seems so deliberate." Poirot regarded her with a gentle nod. "Mademoiselle, the blowpipe is a lie dressed as a truth. Its purpose was not to kill, but to confuse. And in that confusion, we will find our killer." The reporters surged forward, their questions a barrage of noise, but Poirot waved them off with a polite but firm gesture. He stepped into the cool Croydon air, his mind alight with the puzzle's pieces: the wasp, the thorn, the blowpipe, the passengers' lies. The truth was there, hidden in the crowded cabin of the Prometheus, waiting for his little gray cells to uncover it. He smiled slyly, his mustache curling upward. "The truth is close," he murmured, "but not yet mine." The inquest had been a stage, and the players had performed some poorly, some with cunning. Poirot knew the next act would bring him closer to the killer, and he relished the challenge. For now, he walked toward the waiting car, his cane tapping a steady rhythm, his mind already plotting the next move in this airborne dance of death. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Croydon pavement as Poirot and Japp made their way to a nearby café to discuss the inquest's revelations. The café, a modest establishment with checkered tablecloths and the aroma of fresh coffee, offered a quiet respite from the morning's chaos. Japp ordered a pot of tea, while Poirot predictably requested a "'tis you and your fancy drinks." Japp grumbled, but his tone was fond. Over their beverages, Poirot began to dissect the testimonies. "The wasp, Japp," he said, stirring his tisane with a delicate silver spoon. "It is a detail that nags at me. Why was it there? A distraction, yes, but why a wasp? And why did Clancy make such a show of swatting it?" Japp shrugged, sipping. His tea could be nothing. Planes get insects sometimes. Maybe Clancy's just jumpy. Poirot shook his head. Nan, my friend, in a murder so precise, nothing is by chance. The wasp was noticed by multiple passengers: Clancy, Gale, Davis. It was meant to be noticed, but for what purpose? Japp leaned back, his chair creaking. "You're saying the killer planted the wasp? That's a bit far-fetched even for you." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Not planted, perhaps, but used. A wasp is a small thing, easily overlooked, yet it draws attention. It is a sleight of hand, Japp, a magician's trick to divert the eye." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Fournier, the discreet detective, who had traveled from Paris to assist. His dark suit was impeccable, but his expression was weary. "Poirot," he said, sliding into a chair, "this case is a nightmare. Giselle's ledgers are a labyrinth: debts, blackmail, secrets stretching across Europe. Half the passengers on that plane had reason to want her dead." Poirot nodded, unsurprised. "And yet, only one killed her. We must find the thread that connects the motive to the method." "The blowpipe, Fournier, have you traced its origins?" Fournier sighed. "Not yet. It's an odd piece, likely South American, but it could have been bought in any curio shop in Paris. The shopkeepers I've spoken to are cagey. Either they know nothing, or they're hiding something." Poirot tapped his fingers on the table. "The blowpipe is a lie, Fournier. It was not used to kill Madame Giselle. The thorn was delivered by another means, perhaps a simpler one. The blowpipe was placed to confuse us, to make us think of savages and jungles, when the truth is closer to home." Japp raised an eyebrow. "You're saying the killer carried a blowpipe just to throw it under your seat? That's bold." "Bold? Yes," Poirot said, "but also clever. The killer knew I would be on that flight. They knew my reputation. They wished to make Hercule Poirot a suspect, if only for a moment, to muddy the waters." Fournier frowned. "But who would dare frame you? That's a risky move." Poirot's smile was almost predatory, a desperate one. "Fournier, the killer, is someone with much to lose, someone who fears exposure above all else." Their discussion turned to the passengers' motives. The Countess of Horbury's financial troubles were no secret. Her cocaine habit, whispered about in the inquest, suggested a woman on the edge, desperate to escape Giselle's blackmail. Norman Gale's charm and dental practice were a thin veneer over his mounting debts, uncovered by Japp's inquiries. Daniel Clancy's novels, with their uncanny parallels to the crime, hinted at a mind that could plan such a murder, or at least imagine it. The DuPont's archaeological work, funded by questionable sources, raised questions about their ties to Giselle's ledgers, and Venetia Kerr's quiet intensity suggested secrets she had yet to reveal. Jane Grey joined them at the café, her presence a welcome addition. She had taken to assisting Poirot, her sharp observations proving valuable. "I keep thinking about Venetia Kerr," she said, stirring her coffee. "She saw something on the plane, I'm sure of it, but she's holding back." "Why?" Poirot regarded her with approval. "Mademoiselle, you have the instincts of a detective. Miss Kerr is afraid, but not of the killer, perhaps of what she knows. We must encourage her to speak." As the afternoon waned, Poirot proposed a plan. "We must return to the Prometheus," he said. "A reconstruction of the flight, with all passengers present. The cabin is small, the movements limited. By recreating the scene, we may see what was not seen before." Japp groaned. "You and your theatrics, Poirot, but I'll arrange it. The airline won't be happy, but they'll cooperate if it means clearing this mess up." Fournier nodded. "I'll dig deeper into Giselle's ledgers. If there's a name that connects to one of our suspects, I'll find it." Jane hesitated, then said, "Mr. Poirot, do you think the killer is still among us on that plane? I mean," Poirot's eyes softened, "Mademoiselle, the killer is always close, watching, waiting, but fear not. Hercule Poirot sees more than they know." The café grew quiet as the trio planned their next steps. Outside, the Croydon streets bustled with evening life, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere, soaring back to the cramped cabin of the Prometheus, where a killer had struck with precision and audacity. The wasp, the thorn, the blowpipe, they were pieces of a puzzle, and he was determined to fit them together. The days following the inquest were a whirlwind of activity. Poirot visited the Prometheus, now grounded at Croydon's aerodrome, and paced its narrow aisle, his cane tapping against the floor as he memorized every seat, every angle. The cabin was a stage, he thought, and the killer had performed a deadly act under the noses of a dozen witnesses. He sat in seat No. 9, his own, and closed his eyes, picturing the passengers, Jane Grey's shy glances at Norman Gale, the Countess's nervous fidgeting, Clancy's frantic swatting, Venetia's watchful gaze. Somewhere in that tableau, the truth lay hidden. Japp, meanwhile, pursued the passengers' financial records, uncovering a web of debts and secrets. The Countess owed Giselle a staggering sum, her gambling debts recorded in the money ledgers. Norman Gale's dental practice was on the brink of collapse, his charm a mask for desperation. Even the Duponts, with their academic credentials, had borrowed heavily to fund their excavations, their benefactors linked to Giselle's Parisian network. Fournier's investigation into the blowpipe yielded a breakthrough. A Parisian shopkeeper admitted selling a similar item to a man matching Norman Gale's description. Though the transaction was months old and the shopkeeper's memory vague, "It's not enough to pin on him," Fournier told Poirot, frustration evident, "but it's something." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Gale's dental tools, needle syringes could have delivered the poison as easily as a blow. But why the blowpipe at all? Why leave such an obvious clue? The answer, he suspected, lay in the killer's psychology of mind that thrived on misdirection. Like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, Jane Grey proved an invaluable ally, her unassuming presence allowing her to overhear conversations the others missed. At a London tea house she reported a hushed exchange between Venetia Kerr and Jean Dupont, their voices tense with unspoken accusations. "I couldn't catch much," Jane admitted, "but they mentioned Giselle's name and something about a debt being settled." Poirot's eyes lit up. "Mademoiselle, you have done well. A debt settled, perhaps not with money, but with blood. We must watch young Dupont closely." As the reconstruction of the flight loomed, Poirot prepared meticulously. He requested diagrams of the Prometheus's cabin, noting the sightlines from each seat. He interviewed the stewards again, pressing Mitchell on his vague memory of the passenger near Giselle's seat. "Think, Monsieur Poirot," urged. "Was it a man, a woman, a coat, a hat, a gesture?" Mitchell frowned, his brow furrowing. "It was a man, I think. Dark coat, moving quickly. But I was busy with the coffee tray, didn't get a good look." Poirot thanked him, his mind cataloguing the detail. A man in a dark coat, Gale Clancy, one of the Duponts, or someone else entirely. The day of the reconstruction arrived, and the passengers gathered at the aerodrome, their faces a mix of apprehension and defiance. The Prometheus stood ready, its engine silent, its cabin a frozen moment from the fatal flight. Poirot directed each passenger to their original seat, his voice calm but authoritative. "We are here to see what was not seen," he said. "You will move as you did, speak as you did, and the truth will emerge." The exercise was tense. The passengers' movements stilted under Poirot's scrutiny. Jane Grey sat in her seat, her eyes darting to Norman Gale, who smiled tightly. The Countess clutched her handbag, her knuckles white. Clancy scribbled in his notebook, muttering about plot twists. Venetia Kerr sat rigid, her gaze fixed on the floor. The Duponts whispered to each other, their voices low. Poirot moved through the cabin, pausing at Giselle's seat. He closed his dice, picturing the moment of her death. The thorn, the poison, the wasp-hole distractions. He thought the killer had acted swiftly, unseen, in a cabin full of witnesses. But how? He turned to the group, his voice cutting through the silence. "Madame et messieurs, one of you knows the truth. One of you placed the blowpipe to deceive, one of you used the wasp to distract, and one of you killed Madame Giselle. I, Hercule Poirot, will find you." The passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes avoiding his. The reconstruction ended without a confession, but Poirot was undeterred. He had seen enough glances, hesitations, a flicker of fear in one pair of eyes. The truth was closer now, tantalizingly near. That evening, as Poirot sat in his London flat, he spread his notes across the table. The wasp, the thorn, the blowpipe, the passengers' secrets, they formed a pattern, one he could almost grasp. He lit a cigarette, not his usual habit, but a rare indulgence when the puzzle was complex, and exhaled a plume of smoke. "The truth is close," he murmured, "but not yet mine." The inquest had been a drama, but the real performance was yet to come. Poirot knew the killer was watching, waiting for his next move, and he, Hercule Poirot, was ready to play his part. Chapter 7. A daughter's shadow. The fog clung to Paris like a conspirator's cloak, swirling around the lampposts as Hercule Poirot stepped out of his taxi onto the cobblestones of the Rue de la Paix. His polished shoes clicked with purpose, though his mind churned with the weight of the mystery aboard the Prometheus. The death of Madame Giselle, the notorious moneylender, had unraveled into a tapestry of secrets, and now a new thread had emerged, a woman claiming to be Giselle's daughter. Poirot adjusted his scarf, his breath visible in the chilly air, and murmured to himself, "A daughter, or a pawn. The truth, it hides in the shadows." Inside the modest office of Fournier, the discreet detective, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and suspicion. Fournier, a lean man with a perpetually furrowed brow, leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on a dossier labeled Giselle. The room was sparsely furnished. save for a cluttered desk and a map of Paris pinned to the wall, its edges curling like the secrets it guarded. Poirot sat opposite, his mustache impeccably groomed, his green eyes sharp despite the fatigue of a sleepless night. "You've heard of this Anne Morisot?" Fournier asked, sliding the dossier across the desk. "She appeared yesterday, bold as brass, claiming to be Giselle's heir. Says she's entitled to the estate, ledgers and all." Poirot's gloved fingers lifted the dossier, flipping through its sparse contents: a birth certificate, a faded photograph of a young woman with Giselle's sharp cheekbones, and a letter penned in precise, looping script. "And yet," Poirot said, his voice soft but piercing, "this woman arrives precisely when her mother's death stirs the waters." "Convenient, Nan," Fournier snorted. "Too convenient. Giselle never spoke of a daughter. Her ledgers mentioned no family, only debts and threats. This Anne Morisot, she's a ghost, or worse, a liar." Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. "A ghost, perhaps, but even ghosts leave footprints. Tell me, Fournier, what do we know of her movements?" The detective recounted what little he had. Anne Morisot had checked into a small hotel near the Gare du Nord 2 days prior, presenting herself at Giselle's lawyer's office with documents asserting her claim. She was elusive, refusing to answer questions about her past beyond vague mentions of a childhood in Lyon and a recent return from abroad. "She's slippery," Fournier said, lighting another cigarette. "Says she only learned of her mother's death through the newspapers." Poirot closed the dossier with a deliberate snap. "Then we shall meet this Mademoiselle Morisot, but first I must return to London. Inspector Japp has uncovered a thread that pulls at the heart of this case: a passenger's ruin, tied to Giselle's merciless grip." The journey back to London was a blur of rattling trains and Poirot's restless thoughts. The Prometheus murder gnawed at him, not merely for its audacity, a killing in a crowded cabin at 10,000 feet, but for its precision. The thorn in Giselle's neck, coated with a poison yet unidentified, and the blowpipe under his own seat screamed of a calculated mind. Someone had dared to make Hercule Poirot a pawn, and that, he vowed, would be their undoing. In London, the drizzle painted the city in shades of grey as Poirot arrived at Scotland Yard. Inspector Japp, his broad shoulders hunched over a cluttered desk, greeted him with a mix of exasperation and relief. "You're back, Poirot. Good, this case is a ruddy mess. We've got a lead on one of the passengers, Roger Bryant, the doctor. Seems he was up to his neck in debt to Giselle, lost his practice, nearly his house, all to her loans." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A man with everything to lose is a man with motive, mon ami. But tell me, what of the others? The Duponts, the countess, this novelist Clancy?" Japp flipped through a notebook, its pages dog-eared and smudged. "The Duponts, Armand and Jean. Those archaeologists claim they barely knew Giselle, but they're jumpy, like they're hiding something. The Countess of Horbury is a wreck, babbling about her debts and swearing she never touched the woman. As for Clancy, he's off writing his next novel, muttering about poison darts and blowpipes, like he's half in love with the crime." Poirot tapped his cane against the floor, a rhythmic tick that betrayed his racing mind. "And Mademoiselle Jane Grey? She has been most helpful, has she not?" Japp grinned. "Your little hairdresser friend. She's sharp, I'll give her that. Dropped by earlier, said she overheard something odd at Croydon before the flight. A man's voice, low and angry, talking to the Countess about paying up or else. Couldn't place the voice, though." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A clue, Japp, a small one, but it grows. We must find this man, and we must learn what Mademoiselle Morisot hides. Arrange for me to meet her, and summon the passengers to London. I wish to observe them together, to see the cracks in their masks." The next day Poirot found himself in a private dining room at the Savoy, its chandelier casting a golden glow over a table set for tea. The passengers of the Prometheus filed in, their faces a gallery of unease. Jane Grey, her auburn hair neatly pinned, offered Poirot a nervous smile. Norman Gale, the dentist, exuded charm but avoided Poirot's gaze. The Countess of Horbury, draped in furs despite the warmth, clutched her handbag as if it held her secrets. Daniel Clancy, his tweed suit rumpled, scribbled in a notebook, muttering about plot twists. The Duponts' father and son sat stiffly, their eyes darting to the door. Benicia Kerr, the enigmatic aristocrat, sipped her tea with studied calm, while Roger Bryant, the doctor, fidgeted, his face pale. And then there was Anne Morisot. She entered last, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her grey eyes scanning the room like a hunted animal's. Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Mademoiselle Morisot, I am Hercule Poirot. I am most intrigued by your sudden arrival." Anne's smile was tight, her voice low. "I only want what's mine, Monsieur Poirot, my mother's estate, her papers. I've no interest in your investigation." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, Mademoiselle, your mother's death brings you here, at this precise moment. Tell me, where were you when the Prometheus took flight?" Her fingers tightened around her teacup. "I was in Lyon, settling affairs. I learned of her death afterward, as I told the police." "Curious," Poirot said, his tone light but cutting. "For a daughter so devoted, you know little of your mother's life. Her clients, her enemies. Do these names mean nothing to you?" Anne's gaze flickered, but before she could respond, Jane Grey's voice cut through the tension. Monsieur Poirot, I heard something last night. At my hotel, two men were talking in the corridor hushed like they didn't want to be heard. One mentioned Giselle's books and keeping her quiet. I couldn't see their faces, but one voice, it sounded familiar, like someone from the plane. The room stilled. The Countess's teacup clattered against its saucer. Clancy's pen froze mid-sentence. Poirot's smile was serene, but his mind raced. Merci, Mademoiselle Grey. You have given us a gift. Now, let us see who squirms. He turned to Mademoiselle Morisot. You claim to be Giselle's daughter, yet your papers are, how shall I say, incomplete. A birth certificate, yes, but no record of your life with her. Why is this? Anne's face hardened. My mother and I were estranged. She sent me away when I was young. I've lived quietly, away from her world. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft as silk. And yet, you come now, when her books of secrets might fall into your hands. Tell me, did you know of her blackmail? Did you know the names she held in her grip? Anne stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. I've answered enough. I came for my inheritance, not to be accused. As she fled the room, Poirot's gaze followed her, his mind cataloguing every gesture. He turned to Jap, who had been lurking by the door. Follow her, mon ami. She is no daughter, I think, but a key to this puzzle. The days that followed were a whirlwind of inquiries. Poirot pored over Giselle's ledgers, obtained through Fournier's contacts. Their pages a labyrinth of coded names and sums. One entry stood out, a debt tied to a passenger on the Prometheus, a sum so vast it could ruin a life. Jap's investigation into Roger Bryant deepened, revealing a man on the edge, his practice gone, his wife threatening to leave, all because of Giselle's unrelenting demands. Meanwhile, Jane Grey proved an unexpected ally. Her sharp ears and unassuming presence allowed her to slip into places Poirot could not. At a London cafe, she reported another overheard conversation, this time between Norman Gale and a man Poirot suspected was a bookie, discussing settling accounts with a woman who knew too much. Jane's face flushed as she recounted it, torn between her growing affection for Gale and her loyalty to Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, she said, twisting her gloves. I don't want to believe Norman's involved, but he's been so secretive. Lately. Poirot patted her hand. The heart, it clouds the eyes, mademoiselle. But fear not, Hercule Poirot sees clearly. That evening, as Poirot sat in his apartment, the fire crackling, a telegram arrived from Fournier and Morisot spotted at Gare du Nord. Boarded train to Brussels. Suspect alias. Poirot's fingers drummed the armrest. A daughter, or a pawn, he murmured again, the words now a mantra. He summoned Jap and Jane to his apartment the next morning, laying out his plan. We must tighten the net. Mademoiselle Morisot is not what she seems, but she is not the killer, not yet. The blowpipe, the thorn, the wasp, these are the tools of a mind that plays chess, not checkers. We must find the player. Jap scratched his head. You're saying she's a decoy? Perhaps, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. Or perhaps she is a piece moved by another. We must search her hotel, her papers, and we must watch the passengers someone will break. The search of Anne's hotel room yielded little. A suitcase with modest clothes, a locked diary, and a train ticket stub to Brussels. The diary, once picked open by Jap's less than legal methods, revealed cryptic entries, dates, initials, and sums of money, mirroring Giselle's ledgers. One entry chilled Poirot. CH must pay, or all is lost. The initials matched the Countess of Horbury. Poirot confronted the Countess at her Mayfair flat, its opulence a stark contrast to her frayed nerves. She admitted to owing Giselle a fortune, her cocaine habit draining her funds. But I didn't kill her, she cried, her voice shrill. I was desperate, yes, but murder, never. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting then. Who, madame, did you meet before the flight? Who spoke of paying up or else? The Countess paled, her hands trembling. I can't say. They'll ruin me. Then you leave me no choice, Poirot said, rising. The truth will come, with or without you. As he left, Jane Grey awaited him outside, her face pale. Monsieur Poirot, I followed Norman last night. He went to a warehouse in Soho, met a man with a scar. They argued about money, and Norman said something about the plan going wrong. Poirot's heart quickened. You have done well, mademoiselle. Now, we must act swiftly. The warehouse in Soho was a decrepit shell, its windows boarded, its air thick with dust. Poirot, Jap, and a reluctant Jane crept inside, guided by a tip from Fournier's Brussels contact. In the shadows, they found crates stamped with the curio shop's logo, the same shop tied to the blowpipe. A ledger, hidden in a crate, listed transactions with initials CH, RBN, Getha, Countess, Roger Bryant, and Norman Gale. Before Poirot could speak, a noise echoed, a door slamming. Jap drew his revolver, but the figure was gone. Only a note remained scrawled in haste. The books are burned. The game is over. Poirot's eyes blazed. Not yet, Ms. Amos. The game is far from over. That night, as Poirot sat by his fire, the pieces of the puzzle swirled in his mind. Anne Morisot's sudden flight, the Countess's fear, Norman Gale's secret meetings, the blowpipe's origins all pointed to a conspiracy larger than one killer. He closed his eyes, his little grey cells humming. The wasp, the thorn, the blowpipe. They were distractions. But from what? And who? A knock at the door startled him. Jane Grey stood there, breathless. Monsieur Poirot, it's an MRSO. She's back in London. I saw her at King's Cross, getting off a train. She looked terrified. Poirot rose, his cane tapping the floor. Then we must find her, mademoiselle, for she is either the hunter or the hunted. The chapter ends with Poirot stepping into the London night, his silhouette sharp against the fog, his voice a whisper. A daughter or a pawn? The answer lies in the shadows, and Hercule Poirot will find it. Chapter 8. The blowpipes riddled the morning air in Paris, carried a crisp edge, the kind that sharpened the senses and made the city's labyrinthine streets feel alive with secrets. Hercule Poirot stood outside a narrow shopfront in the Marais district, his polished shoes catching the faint gleam of a street lamp. The sign above the door read, Curassites Exotiques, its faded gold lettering hinting at treasures from distant corners of the world. Inside, shelves groaned under the weight of carved masks, ivory figurines, and strange implements that seemed to whisper tales of far-off jungles and forgotten tribes. Poirot's mustache twitched as he adjusted his hat, his eyes narrowing at the object of his pursuit, the blowpipe, that perplexing artifact found under his seat on the Prometheus. Now the linchpin of a murder investigation. Inspector Fournier, his French counterpart, stood beside him, his angular face set in a frown. This shop, Monsieur Poirot, it is known to collectors of unusual items. If the blowpipe came from anywhere in Paris, it is here. His voice held a trace of skepticism, as if he doubted Poirot's insistence on chasing such an obscure lead. But Poirot, undeterred, pushed open the door, a small bell jingling to announce their arrival. The shop's interior was dim, lit by flickering gas lamps that cast long shadows across the cluttered space. A wiry man with a pinched face and spectacles, perched on his nose, emerged from behind a counter. Messieurs, welcome, he said, his voice oily and practiced. How may I assist you? His eyes darted between Poirot and Fournier, sensing the weight of their purpose. Poirot's gaze was steady, his tone polite but firm. We seek information about a blowpipe, monsieur, one of South American origin, perhaps with intricate carvings. It was found in a most curious place. He offered no further details. Watching the shopkeeper's reaction with the precision of a hawk, the man's fingers twitched, betraying a flicker of unease. Blowpipes, you say? We have many artifacts here, but such items are rare. Very rare. He turned, gesturing vaguely toward a glass case in the corner. Perhaps you would like to see. Poirot followed, his cane tapping softly on the wooden floor. The case held an assortment of objects, a feathered headdress, a jade amulet, and there, nestled among them, a blowpipe not unlike the one from the Prometheus. Its dark wood was etched with spiraling patterns, its length polished to a gleam. Poirot's eyes gleamed too, but he kept his expression neutral. This is most interesting, monsieur. Tell me, have you sold such an item recently, say, within the past month? The shopkeeper hesitated, his spectacles glinting as he shifted his weight. I would need to check my records. Many customers pass through, explorers, collectors, even writers seeking inspiration. He glanced at Fournier, who stood with his arms crossed, exuding quiet menace perhaps. Poirot said smoothly, you recall a specific customer, a man or woman with an interest in such exotic tools. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We are investigating a matter of great importance, a matter of life and death. The shopkeeper swallowed, his hands fumbling with a ledger. I recall a gentleman 2 weeks ago perhaps. He was English, I think. He asked about blowpipes, said he was writing a book, wanted something authentic. He flipped through the pages, his fingers trembling. Here, yes, a Mr. Clancy, Daniel Clancy. He purchased a blowpipe, much like the one you describe. Poirot's heart quickened, though his face remained impassive. Daniel Clancy, the detective novelist with a penchant for dramatic flourishes and a nervous habit of swatting at wasps. The man whose seat on the Prometheus had been just 2 rows from Madame Giselle's. The coincidence was too striking to ignore. And this Mr. Clancy? Poirot pressed. Did he say anything else? Perhaps why he needed such an item? The shopkeeper shook his head, his voice unsteady. No, just that it was for research. He paid in cash and left quickly. That's all I know. Fournier stepped forward, his tone sharp. You are certain, monsieur, nothing else about this man or his purchase? His hand rested lightly on the counter. A subtle threat. The shopkeeper's eyes widened. I swear, that's all. I run an honest business. I don't ask questions of my customers. Poirot raised a hand, calming the tension. Merci, monsieur. You have been most helpful. He turned to Fournier, his expression unreadable. We must speak with Mr. Clancy again, I think. His novels, they are full of poisoned darts and clever disguises. Perhaps life has imitated his art. As they stepped back into the Parisian street, the sky had darkened, clouds gathering like conspirators. Fournier lit a cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke. You think Clancy is our man, Poirot, a writer playing at murder? Poirot's eyes twinkled. I think, mon ami, that the blowpipe is no accident. It is a lie, carefully placed to mislead. But by whom? That is the question. He tapped his cane against the cobblestones, his mind already racing ahead to the next encounter. Back in London, the investigation gained momentum. Poirot arranged to meet Daniel Clancy at his modest flat in Bloomsbury, a cluttered space filled with books, typewriters, and half-finished manuscripts. Clancy greeted them with a nervous laugh, his thin frame practically vibrating with energy. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Japp. To what do I owe the pleasure? His eyes darted to the blowpipe, now wrapped in cloth and held by Fournier. Poirot smiled, his demeanor disarming. Monsieur Clancy, we have been tracing the origins of a most curious item. He nodded to Fournier, who unwrapped the blowpipe and placed it on the table. Clancy's face paled, his fingers twitching as if longing to swat at an invisible wasp. That's mine, Clancy stammered. Or rather, it looks like one I bought in Paris. For research, you understand. My next novel, The Dart of Doom, features a South American assassin. I needed authenticity. Poirot's gaze was piercing. And yet, this very blowpipe is one remarkably like it was found under my seat on the Prometheus, where Madame Giselle met her unfortunate end. A coincidence, Nan. Clancy's mouth opened and closed, his words tumbling out in a rush. I swear I didn't bring it on the plane. I left it in my study, locked away. Someone must have taken it. I'm no murderer, Monsieur Poirot. I write about crime. I don't commit it. Japp, standing by the door, snorted. Convenient that your stories are full of poison darts and clever killers. Maybe you got tired of just writing about it. Clancy's eyes widened, his voice rising. That's absurd. I'm a novelist, not a lunatic. Besides, I was nowhere near Madame Giselle's seat. I was writing in my notebook, plotting a scene. Ask the stewards. Poirot raised a hand, his tone soothing. Calm yourself, Monsieur Clancy. Tell me, when did you last see this blowpipe in your possession? Clancy rubbed his temples, his brow furrowed. 2 days before the flight, I showed it to a friend, a fellow writer who thought it was fascinating. Then I locked it in my desk. I haven't touched it since. And this friend, Poirot said, leaning forward, what is their name? Clancy hesitated, his fingers drumming on the table. I'd rather not say. They've nothing to do with this. They're just a colleague, someone I share ideas with. Fournier's eyes narrowed. You protect this friend, monsieur, but you do not protect yourself. Speak or we will assume the worst. Clancy's shoulders slumped, his voice barely. A whispered was Norman Gale, the dentist. He came to my flat, said he was curious about my research. He's a fan of my books, you see, but he couldn't. Poirot's mind raced. Norman Gale, the charming dentist with a flirtatious smile and a seat near Madame Giselle. The man whose dental tools, Poirot had noted, included needles fine enough to mimic a thorn's prick. The coincidence was growing ever less coincidental. Mercy, Monsieur Clancy, Poirot said, rising. You have given us much to consider. As they left Clancy's flat, Japp muttered, he's hiding something, Poirot. That nervous tick, the way he avoids our eyes. And Gale, why is he tangled up in this? Poirot's expression was inscrutable. The blowpipe, mon ami, is a riddle. It points to Clancy, to Gale, perhaps to others. But it is too obvious, too theatrical. I suspect it is a frame, designed to distract us from the true hand that wielded the thorn. The investigation took them next to the elegant townhouse of the Countess of Horbury, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her desperation. Lady Cicely Horbury received them in a drawing-room dripping with opulence, crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and a faint scent of her signature perfume. She lounged on a chaise, her silk gown clinging to her form, but her eyes were wary, her fingers clutching a cigarette with unsteady hands. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low and husky, I've told Inspector Japp everything. I was in my seat, minding my own business. I didn't know that wretched woman Giselle beyond a passing glance. Poirot tilted his head, his tone polite but probing. And yet, madame, you were in debt to her, were you not? A substantial sum, I understand, tied to certain indiscretions she threatened to expose. The Countess's face tightened, her cigarette pausing midair. How dare you? I don't know what you're implying, but I won't be slandered. Yes, I knew of Giselle. Everyone in Paris did. She was a vulture, preying on people's mistakes. But I didn't kill her. Fournier, standing by the fireplace, interjected. Then why, madame, did you linger near her seat during the flight? The steward, Monsieur Mitchell, saw you. Her eyes flashed with anger, but Poirot noted the fear beneath it. I was stretching my legs, nothing more. That plane was a sardine can. Am I to be accused for needing air? Poirot's smile was thin. And the blowpipe, madame, have you ever seen such an item? Perhaps in a curio shop, or in the hands of a fellow passenger. The Countess laughed, a brittle sound. A blowpipe, what nonsense. I'm a lady, not some jungle savage. You're wasting your time, Monsieur Poirot. But Poirot was not so easily dismissed. He leaned forward, his voice soft but unyielding. Madame, the truth is like a debt, it must be paid. If you know something, however small, it is better to speak now. Her composure cracked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Something. Not a blowpipe, but a man. Near Giselle's seat, before the steward found her. I thought he was just adjusting his luggage, but he was quick, too quick. I didn't see his face clearly. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. It might have been that dentist, Gale, or perhaps Clancy. I don't know. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. Mercy, madame. Your candor is appreciated. As they left the townhouse, Jap muttered, she's lying through her teeth, Poirot, or at least holding something back. Gale, Clancy, everyone's pointing fingers. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And that, mon ami, is precisely the problem. Too many fingers, too many clues. The blowpipe is a lie, but it is a lie that reveals the truth. The next day, Poirot and Fournier visited Norman Gale's dental practice, a sleek office in Harley Street lined with gleaming instruments and the faint smell of antiseptic. Gale greeted them with his usual charm, his smile as polished as his tools. Gentlemen, this is a surprise. Have you come for a checkup, or is this about that dreadful business on the plane? Poirot's gaze was steady, his voice deceptively mild. Monsieur Gale, we are curious about your interest in exotic artifacts. A blowpipe, for instance, purchased by Monsieur Clancy, he says. You saw it, admired it. Is this true? Gale's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Clancy, oh yes. He showed me some odd trinket at his flat. Said it was for his writing. I thought it was fascinating, but hardly my sort of thing. I deal in teeth, not tribal weapons. He chuckled, but the sound was strained. Fournier's tone was blunt. And your dental tools, Monsieur Gale. Needles, fine and sharp, not unlike the thorn that killed Madame Giselle. Convenient, Nan. Gale's eyes narrowed, his charm giving way to irritation. That's absurd. My tools are for saving lives, not taking them. I was in my seat the whole flight, chatting with Miss Grey Asker. Poirot's mustache twitched. And yet, monsieur, you were seen near Madame Giselle's seat. By more than one witness. A curious coincidence, is it not? Gale's face flushed, his voice rising. This is a witch hunt. I'm a respectable man, not some murderer skulking about with poisoned darts. You've got the wrong man, Poirot. Poirot rose, his expression unreadable. Perhaps Monsieur Gale, or perhaps the truth is hidden, like a needle in a haystack. We shall see. As they left the practice, Fournier muttered, he's too smooth, Poirot. That smile, it's a mask. And those needles. They could deliver a poison as easily as a filling. Poirot nodded, his mind worried. The blowpipe, the thorn, the wasp, all are distractions. But the truth, mon ami, lies in the connections. Gale, Clancy, the countess, they are threads in a web, and at its center is the killer. The investigation stretched into the evening, with Poirot retreating to his hotel room to pore over his notes. He sketched the Prometheus cabin's layout, marking each passenger's seat. Giselle in No. 2, himself in No. 9, the countess in No. 13, Gale and Jane Grey nearby, Clancy 2 rows back. The blowpipe under his seat was a deliberate plant. He was certain, but by whom, and why? The weapon was too exotic, too conspicuous to be the true method of murder. The thorn, with its trace of poison, was the key. But how had it been delivered in a crowded cabin? He turned to the passenger list, his finger tracing the names. Armand and Jean Dupont, the archaeologists, had been evasive, their knowledge of South American cultures raising questions. Venetia Kerr, with her sharp eyes, had seen something but feared to speak. The stewards, Mitchell and Davis, had been distracted, their attention divided among the passengers. And then there was an Amoroso, Giselle's supposed daughter, that had vanished after a cryptic phone call. Each was a piece of the rings, each with secrets to hide. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Jane Grey stood there, her face pale but determined. Monsieur Poirot, I had to see you. I overheard something on the flight. Not just the countess's argument, but something else. To passengers, men talking in low voices near the rear of the plane. I couldn't hear much, but one mentioned settling the debt. I thought it was nothing, but now ... Poirot's eyes sharpened. These men, mademoiselle, did you recognize them? Jane hesitated, her voice soft. I think one was Monsieur Clancy, the other ... I'm not sure. It might have been one of the Duponts. It was so quick and I was distracted. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Mercy, Mademoiselle Grey, have done well to tell me. This debt is the key to the motive, I think. As Jane left, Poirot returned to his notes, his little grey cells working furiously. The blowpipe, the thorn, the wasp, the dettol, pointed to a calculated crime, disguised as something primitive. He closed his eyes, picturing the cabin, the passengers, the fleeting moments unnoticed by most, and then, like a spark in the dark, a thought struck him. The blowpipe was not the weapon, it was the bait. The real method was subtler, hidden in plain sight. He rose, his cane tapping the floor with purpose. The riddle is unraveling, he murmured. The blowpipe is a lie, but it points to the truth. And the truth, mon ami, is closer than we think. The chapter closed with Poirot standing at his window, gazing at the London skyline, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The blowpipe's origins, Clancy's nervousness, Gale's needles, the countess's fear, Jane's overheard whisper, were threads in a tapestry of deceit. The truth was near, but it would take one final gathering to weave it together, and Hercule Poirot was ready to pull the final thread. Chapter 9. Love and Lies. The late summer sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Poirot's temporary London lodgings, casting long slanted beams across the room. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint musk of the city beyond the windows. Hercule Poirot sat at a small mahogany desk, his hands folded neatly before him, his moustache impeccably trimmed, and his eyes narrowed in thought. The investigation into Madame Giselle's murder aboard the Prometheus had reached a fever pitch, and the threads of the case, blackmail, poison, and a curious blowpipe were beginning to knot together in his mind. Yet something elusive remained, a shadow just beyond his grasp. Today he intended to tug at the threads of love and deception, for he suspected they were entwined in ways the suspects themselves did not yet fully comprehend. Jane Grey, the young hairdresser whose bright eyes and quick wit had caught Poirot's attention, arrived promptly at 10 o'clock. Her auburn hair was neatly pinned, though a stray curl betrayed her nervous energy. She wore a modest blue dress, practical yet flattering, and her hands fidgeted slightly as she sat across from Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice steady but tinged with unease, "I've been thinking about what you said about how the heart can lead us astray. I don't know if I'm imagining things, but Norman, Mr. Gale, I mean, he's been acting strangely since the inquest." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Strangely, mademoiselle, in what manner, precisely?" Jane hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her handbag. "He's charming, always has been. But yesterday, when we met for tea, he seemed distracted, kept looking over his shoulder, as if someone was watching. And when I mentioned Madame Giselle, he changed the subject so quickly I barely noticed it at first." Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "The heart, Mademoiselle Grey, is a curious thing. It blinds us to truths we might otherwise see. Tell me, what else have you observed about Monsieur Gale?" Jane flushed slightly, her cheeks warming. "I don't want to seem disloyal. He's been kind to me and I like him. But there was something else. When we were leaving the cafe, he dropped his cigarette case. A piece of paper fell out, a receipt, I think, from a chemist's shop. I didn't see the details, but he snatched it up so quickly, it made me wonder." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A receipt, you say? Most interesting. And what of his demeanor when you spoke of the murder?" "He was nervous," Jane admitted. "He laughed it off, said it was all too melodramatic, like something from one of Mr. Clancy's novels, but his hands were shaking when he lit his cigarette." Poirot leaned back, his eyes half closed. "Merci, mademoiselle, your observations are most valuable. The heart may flutter, but the eyes they see. Now, I must ask you to do something for me. You will meet Monsieur Gale again." "Yes," Jane nodded, though her expression was uncertain. "We're supposed to have dinner tonight," Poirot said, rising from his chair with a small, satisfied smile. "Observe him closely, mademoiselle. Note his words, his gestures, his silences. And if you should see that receipt again, do not hesitate to examine it, discreetly, of course." Jane's eyes widened. "You think Norman's involved, don't you?" "I think," Poirot said carefully, "that everyone aboard the Prometheus has a story, and not all stories are true. Now, go, mademoiselle, enjoy your dinner, but keep your wits about you." As Jane left, Poirot turned to the window, his gaze drifting to the bustling street below. Norman Gale, the charming dentist, had caught his attention early in the investigation. His easy smile and attentive manner toward Jane were convincing, but Poirot had learned long ago that charm could be a mask. The receipt Jane mentioned was a new thread, one he intended to pull. An hour later, Poirot found himself in the cluttered office of Inspector Japp at Scotland Yard. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and ink, and papers were strewn across the desk like fallen leaves. Japp, his tie slightly askew, looked up from a report with a mixture of exasperation and relief. "Poirot, you've got a knack for showing up when I'm drowning in paperwork," Japp said, tossing his pen aside. "What's on your mind? Still chasing that blowpipe nonsense?" "The blowpipe, mon ami, is no nonsense," Poirot replied, settling into a chair. "It is a deliberate puzzle, placed to confuse us. But I come to you with a new question. What do you know of Monsieur Norman Gale, the dentist?" Japp raised an eyebrow. "Gale, the chap with the film star smile. He's clean, far as I can tell. Runs a practice in Harley Street. No criminal record, no debts we've uncovered. Seems smitten with that hairdresser of yours, Miss Grey." Poirot's lips curved slightly. "And yet, the cleanest surfaces often hide the deepest stains. Tell me, have you searched his office or his lodgings?" Japp frowned. "Not yet. No cause, really. He's cooperative, answers questions, doesn't squirm like some of the others." "Why, you got something on him?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. "Mademoiselle Grey mentioned a receipt from a chemist's shop, dropped by Monsieur Gale. It may be nothing, but I would like to know what a dentist purchases from a chemist that causes him such haste to conceal it." Japp leaned back, scratching his chin. "Chemist's aid could be anything: toothpaste, aspirin, or something less innocent." "You thinking poison?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "I think mon ami, that we must consider all possibilities. The thorn that killed Madame Giselle was laced with a poison curare perhaps, or something equally exotic. Such substances are not easily obtained, but a dentist has access to chemicals, does he not? Jap nodded slowly. Novocaine sedatives, that sort of thing. I'll have a word with the lads, see if we can get a warrant to poke around Gale's office. Discreetly, mind you, don't want to spook him. Discretion is wise, Poirot agreed, and while you pursue this, I shall arrange a little experiment. A test, if you will, to see who among our suspects flinches when the truth is dangled before them. Jap groaned. One of your theatrical stunts, is it? Just don't go accusing half of London and expect me to clean up the mess. Poirot chuckled. Have faith, my friend. The truth is a delicate thing, but it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. That evening Poirot gathered the suspects in a private dining room at the Savoy Hotel. The setting was elegant, with crystal chandeliers casting a soft glow over the table, but the atmosphere was taut with suspicion. The passengers from the Prometheus sat in a semicircle, their faces a gallery of unease. Norman Gale, his smile tight, the Countess of Horbury, her eyes darting nervously, Daniel Clancy, clutching a notebook as if it were a lifeline, Venetia Kerr composed but watchful, the Duponts Armand and Jean whispering to each other, and the stewards, Henry Mitchell and Albert Davis, standing awkwardly at the edges. Inspector Japp leaned against the wall, arms crossed, while Fournier, discreet detective, sat beside Poirot, his expression unreadable. Poirot rose, his small stature commanding the room. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice smooth and deliberate. We are here to discuss a murder most audacious, a crime committed in the sky, where none could escape. Madame Giselle was killed with a poisoned thorn, delivered by a blowpipe. But the question remains, who among you had the means, the motive, and the opportunity? The Countess of Horbury lit a cigarette, her hands trembling. This is absurd, she snapped. I've answered your questions a dozen times. I was nowhere near that woman's seat. Poirot's eyes flicked to her. And yet, madame, you were indebted to her, were you not? A debt that threatened to ruin you. The Countess paled, her cigarette pausing midair. That's private business, she muttered. Poirot turned to Norman Gale. And you, Monsieur Gale, a dentist, skilled with precision instruments, tell me, have you ever worked with poisons in your practice? Gale's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. Poisons? Good heavens, no. I deal in fillings and extractions, not whatever it is you're suggesting. Poirot's gaze lingered on him, then moved to Daniel Clancy. Monsieur Clancy, your novels are filled with ingenious murders, poison, darts, hidden motives. Is it coincidence that this crime mirrors your fiction? Clancy flushed, his fingers tightening on his notebook. I write stories, Mr. Poirot. I don't live them. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. Tonight, I propose a test. I have learned that a vial of snake venom curare, to be precise, was found among the luggage of one among you, a poison identical to that which killed Madame Giselle. The room went still. The Countess dropped her cigarette, her face ashen. Norman Gale's jaw tightened, and Venetia Kerr's eyes narrowed. The Duponts exchanged a glance, while the stewards shifted uncomfortably. But Poirot continued, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. This vial is a fabrication, a lie, created by me to observe your reactions. And oh, how revealing they are. The Countess stood, her chair scraping against the floor. This is outrageous. You can't toy with us like this. Sit, Madame Poirot said sharply. The truth does not care for your indignation. As the Countess sank back into her seat, Poirot's eyes scanned the room. Norman Gale's hands were clenched, his knuckles white. Daniel Clancy scribbled furiously in his notebook, as if to distract himself. Venetia Kerr remained calm, her expression almost too composed. The Duponts whispered again, their voices too low to catch. Poirot stepped forward, holding up a small glass vial, empty but gleaming in the chandelier light. This is not the poison, he said, but your fear of it betrays you. One of you knows more than you have admitted. One of you knows where the true vial lies. The room erupted in protests, but Poirot raised his voice. Silence. The truth is close. Mise Amos. Tomorrow, I shall visit the chemist's shop from which a certain receipt was obtained. And then, we shall see who trembles. As the suspects dispersed, their faces a mixture of anger and fear, Japp approached Poirot. Bluffing, were you? That vial bit was clever, but you've stirred a hornet's nest. Poirot smiled faintly. A hornet's nest, mon ami, is precisely what I intend to stir. For it is in chaos that the truth reveals itself. The next morning, Poirot and Fournier stood outside a small chemist's shop in Soho, its window cluttered with bottles and advertisements for tonics. The receipt Jane had mentioned was their guide, though Poirot had not yet seen it. Japp had secured it from Gale's lodgings overnight, and it lay in Poirot's pocket. A thin slip of paper listing a purchase of chemical supplies dated 2 days before the Prometheus flight. Inside, the chemist, the wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted them cautiously. What's this about, gentlemen? I run a respectable business. Poirot produced the receipt. This, monsieur, was issued by your shop. Can you tell me what was purchased? The chemist adjusted his glasses and studied the paper. Let me check my ledger. Yes, here it is. Sodium chloride, some antiseptic solution, and, oh, a small quantity of curare. For a dentist, you said. Unusual, but he had a prescription note. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A prescription, you say? From whom? The chemist shrugged. Didn't say. Just showed me a signed note from a doctor. I assumed it was for research or something. Dentists use odd things sometimes. Fournier exchanged a glance with Poirot. Can you describe this dentist? Tall, good-looking chap, charming smile, said his name was Gale. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Merci, monsieur. You have been most helpful. As they stepped outside, Fournier's brow furrowed. Curare Poirot in a dentist's hands. This is damning. Not yet, Poirot cautioned. A man like Gale would not be so careless as to leave a receipt. The blowpipe under my seat. The receipt in his pocket. These are too convenient. We must look deeper. That afternoon, Poirot met Jane Grey at a quiet tea shop near Regent Street. She looked pale, her eyes shadowed with worry. Monsieur Poirot, I saw Norman last night. Like you asked, he was different. Kept asking me about you, what you'd said, what you knew. And when I mentioned the receipt, he went white as a sheet. Poirot leaned forward. Did you see it again, mademoiselle? Jane nodded, pulling a folded slip from her purse. I took it from his jacket when he wasn't looking. I know it's wrong, but you said to be discreet. Poirot took the receipt, his fingers brushing the paper. It matched the one from Gale's lodgings, confirming the purchase of curare. You have done well, mademoiselle. This is a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. Jane's voice trembled. Do you think Norman, could he really have done it? Poirot's expression softened. The heart, mademoiselle, is a fragile thing, but the truth is stronger. Go home, rest, I will handle this. Back at his lodgings, Poirot spread the case's clues across his desk, the blowpipe, the thorn, the wasp, the receipt, and a sketch of the Prometheus cabin. His little grey cells worked furiously, piecing together the inconsistencies. The blowpipe under his seat was too obvious, the receipt too easily found. Someone was orchestrating a deception, but who? He summoned Jap and Fournier for a late-night meeting. Mes amis, he said, pacing the room, we have been led astray by clever hands. The murderer wishes us to believe Monsieur Gale is guilty, but I suspect he is a pawn. The true killer is someone who knows the art of misdirection. Jap, for round you're saying Gale's being framed. Then who's the real culprit? Poirot stopped pacing, his eyes alight. Tomorrow, we shall stage one final act. I will confront the suspects with a truth they cannot deny, and then, the heart and the lies will be laid bare. The following day, Poirot arranged a second gathering at the Savoy, this time in a smaller, more intimate room. The suspects sat in tense silence, their faces etched with dread. Poirot stood at the head of the table, holding the receipt and the empty vial from his earlier bluff. Madame et messieurs, he began. The murder of Madame Giselle was a crime of precision and deceit. The blowpipe, the thorn, the wasp ball were designed to distract us, but the truth lies in the smallest details. He turned to Norman Gale. Monsieur Gale, you purchased curare, did you not? Gale's face drained of color. Yes, but it was for my practice. A colleague asked me to obtain it for a study. I swear, I didn't use it. Poirot nodded, then turned to the Countess of Horbury. And you, madame, your debts to Giselle were crushing. You feared exposure, did you not? The Countess's voice was shrill. I've told you, I didn't kill her. I was nowhere near her seat. Poirot's gaze shifted to Daniel Clancy. And you, Monsieur Clancy. Your novels speak of poison darts and hidden motives. Did you write this crime before you lived it? Clancy sputtered. This is preposterous. I'm a writer, not a murderer. Poirot raised a hand. Enough. The truth is this. The murderer used the blowpipe to frame another, knowing we would find it. The receipt was planted to implicate Monsieur Gale, but the wasp was the key. It was not a coincidence. It was placed to distract us from the true method of delivery. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. The killer is among you, and they are clever, but they did not account for Hercule Poirot. The room was silent. Every eye on him. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. Tomorrow I will reveal the murderer. Until then, reflect on your secrets, for they are no longer safe. As the suspects filed out, their faces pale, Jap clapped Poirot on the shoulder. You've got them rattled, Poirot. But do you really know who did it? Poirot smiled, his eyes gleaming. The heart betrays what the mind conceals. Mon ami, tomorrow, all will be clear. The chapter ends with Poirot alone in his lodgings, staring at the sketch of the Prometheus cabin. He traces a finger along the seats, his mind alight with the final piece of the puzzle. The truth is near, and the lies of love will soon unravel. Chapter 10. The truth aloft. The private dining room at the Croydon Aerodrome Hotel was a study in understated elegance, its walls paneled in dark oak and lit by soft amber sconces that cast a warm glow over the long mahogany table. At the head of the table stood Hercule Poirot, his small, meticulous figure commanding the room with an air of quiet authority. His black patent leather shoes gleamed under the light, and his mustache was waxed to perfection, its tips curling with a precision that mirrored the workings of his mind. Around the table sat the passengers of the ill-fated Prometheus flight. Their face is a gallery of emotions: suspicion, fear, curiosity, and, in some cases, barely concealed guilt. Inspector Japp, his burly frame slightly hunched, stood near the door, his eyes darting from face to face. Fournier, the French street detective, leaned against a wall, his sharp gaze fixed on Poirot. Jane Grey, now Poirot's unofficial assistant, sat to his right, her notepad open, her pencil poised. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes a storm. Poirot cleared his throat, a small, deliberate sound that silenced the faint rustle of nervous movements. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice smooth and measured. "We are gathered here to unravel the mystery of Madame Giselle's death aboard the Prometheus, a murder most audacious, committed in the sky, where one might think the eyes of justice could not reach. But Hercule Poirot's little grey cells, they reach everywhere." He paused, letting his words settle over the room like a fine mist. The Countess of Horbury, her face pale beneath her carefully applied rouge, clutched her pearl necklace. Norman Gale, the dentist, adjusted his tie, his charming smile strained. Daniel Clancy, the detective novelist, scribbled furiously in a small notebook, his eyes glinting with a mix of fascination and unease. Venetia Kerr, the cool aristocrat, sat ramrod straight, her lips pressed into a thin line. The archaeologists, Armand and Jean Dupont, exchanged a glance, their faces unreadable. Dr. Roger Bryant, his hands clasped tightly, stared at the table. The stewards, Henry Mitchell and Albert Davis, stood awkwardly near the back, their uniforms slightly rumpled from the day's chaos, and at the far end, almost forgotten, sat Anne Morizot, the woman claiming to be Giselle's daughter, her eyes downcast, her hands trembling. Poirot's gaze swept over them all, lingering just long enough to make each feel the weight of his scrutiny. "Let us begin," he said, "with the facts. Madame Giselle, a moneylender of ruthless reputation, was found dead in seat No. 2. A thorn in her neck, laced with a poison identified as a rare South American venom, a blowpipe, an exotic weapon, was discovered under my own seat, No. 9, suggesting an attempt to implicate me. A wasp, dead and swatted, was found near the body, and the passengers, each with their secrets, were all within reach of the victim. The question is not only who killed Madame Giselle, but how and why." He stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "First, the how. The blowpipe is a weapon of misdirection. It is too conspicuous, too theatrical, to be the true method of murder. A blowpipe requires space, breath, and precision, in a crowded cabin where every eye might turn. Yet the thorn, so small, so precise, suggests a different method. A dart, perhaps, delivered not by breath but by hand, or by a mechanism subtle and swift. The wasp, too, is no accident. It was a distraction, released to draw attention, to make passengers swat and look away at the critical moment." Jane Grey leaned forward, her eyes wide. "But who released the wasp, Monsieur Poirot, and how did they get the poison?" Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Patience, Mademoiselle Grey. All will be revealed. Let us consider the wasp, Monsieur Clancy. You were most vocal about swatting it. Nancy novels, filled with poison darts and exotic crimes, suggest a mind familiar with such theatrics." Clancy's pen froze mid-scribble. "Now, see here, Poirot," he stammered, his face reddening. "I write fiction. I'm no murderer. I swatted the wasp because it was buzzing about, annoying everyone." "Precisement," Poirot said, raising a finger. "Annoying everyone, a perfect distraction. But you are not alone in this, monsieur. Clancy, the wasp was released by someone who knew its purpose, and the poison. Dr. Bryant, a man of medicine, would know of rare venoms. Nan." Bryant's hands tightened, his knuckles whitening. "I'm a physician, not a poisoner," he said, his voice low. "I've never handled such a substance." Poirot nodded, as if agreeing. "And yet, the venom was found in a vial, hidden in the luggage of one among us. A vial that could only have come from someone with access to such things, or someone who wished to make it appear so." The Countess of Horbury gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You're accusing me, aren't you, because of my troubles? I had nothing to do with this." "Calm yourself, Lady Horbury," Poirot said, his tone soothing but firm. "Your troubles, as you call them, are known. Madame Giselle held your debts, and you feared her blackmail. But you are not alone in this fear. Monsieur Gale, your dental practice is new, struggling none. A loan from Giselle, perhaps, to keep it afloat." Gale's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you're implying, Poirot. I'm a respectable man. I barely knew the woman." "Respectable, oui," Poirot said, his voice deceptively soft, "but respectability can hide much. And you, Mademoiselle Kerr, so composed, so silent. You saw a figure near Giselle's seat, yet said nothing until pressed." "Why?" Venetia Kerr's eyes met Poirot's unflinching. "I saw nothing clear enough to accuse," she said. "I'm not one for gossip or speculation." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Admirable, mademoiselle, but silence can protect the guilty as much as the innocent. And you, Messieurs Dupont, archaeologists with your travels to distant lands where such poisons might be found." Armand Dupont raised his hands in protest. "Monsieur Poirot, our work is with artifacts, not poisons. We are scholars, not criminals. Scholars, we, Poirot said, nodding. But knowledge is a dangerous thing. And you, Mademoiselle Morizot, should I say, Madame Anne? Your claim to be Giselle's daughter is convenient, Nan. You appear after her death, seeking her fortune, yet your story is vague, your papers uncertain. Anne Morizot's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. I am her daughter. I have proof. I came to claim what's mine, not to kill her. Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. We shall see, madame, but let us return to the crime. The blowpipe, the wasp, the poison all are pieces of a puzzle, but the true key lies in the motive. Madame Giselle was a blackmailer, her ledgers filled with names of the powerful, the desperate, the ruined. One among you owed her not just money, but their very life. One among you could not allow her to live. He turned, pacing slowly along the table, his eyes never leaving the faces before him. Let us reconstruct the flight. The Prometheus, a small cabin, 12 passengers, 2 stewards, and a pilot. Madame Giselle sat in seat No. 2, near the front. The stewards moved frequently, serving coffee, collecting trays. The passengers read, dozed, walked to the lavatory. And yet, in this busy space, a murder was committed unseen. How he stopped, his gaze fixed on the countess. Lady Horbury, you were in seat No. 13, across the aisle and behind Giselle. You rose several times, nervous, agitated. Did you approach her seat? I did not, she cried, her voice shrill. I was unwell. I needed air. Unwell, Poirot repeated, his tone skeptical. And you, Monsieur Gale, in seat No. 17 near the rear. You too moved about, offering your charming smile to Mademoiselle Gray. But did you pass Giselle's seat? Gale's jaw tightened. I may have, but only to stretch my legs. I had no reason to harm her, Poirot nodded, turning to Clancy. And you, Monsieur, in seat No. 10, just behind me. Your swatting of the wasp was most energetic. Did it take you near Giselle? Clancy's eyes darted nervously. I stayed in my seat. Mostly I was writing, you see, plotting a new book. Plotting, we, Poirot said, his voice heavy with meaning. And you, Mademoiselle Kerr, in seat No. 8 beside me. You saw much, yet said little. Why? I've told you, she said coldly. I saw nothing worth reporting. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he moved on. Messieurs Dupont, in seats No. 5 and No. 6, you were near the front, close to Giselle. Did you see her move, speak, react? Jean. Dupont shook his head. She was quiet, reading. We saw nothing unusual. And you, Dr. Bryant, in seat No. 16, near the rear. Your medical knowledge would recognize a death, yet you said nothing until the steward's cry. Bryant's face flushed. I was reading. I didn't notice her until the commotion. Poirot paused, his eyes glinting. And you, Mademoiselle Morizot, in seat No. 12, across from Lady Horbury. You were silent, unnoticed, yet so close to the crime. Anne's voice trembled. I was grieving my mother. I had no reason to kill her. Poirot stepped back, spreading his hands. And so, we have a cabin of innocents, Nan, yet one of you is guilty. Let us consider the timeline. The flight lasted 2 hours. Coffee was served 30 minutes after takeoff. The wasp appeared shortly after, buzzing, distracting. The stewards were busy, the passengers restless, and in this moment Madame Giselle died. He reached into his pocket, producing a small sketch of the cabin's layout, which he placed on the table. Here is the Prometheus, seats numbered, passengers marked. Giselle in 02, myself in 09, the blowpipe beneath me, the wasp, swatted near Clancy in No. 10. The stewards, moving here, here, and here. He traced lines with his finger, his voice low, hypnotic, and the killer, moving unseen, delivering the fatal thorn. Jane Grey spoke up, her voice tentative. But how could they do it without being seen? The cabin was so small. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Exactement, mademoiselle. That is the genius of the crime. The killer did not need to stand, to aim, to blow a dart. The thorn was delivered by a method simpler, yet brilliant. A flick of the wrist, perhaps, or a device hidden in a book, a bag, a tray, and the wasp ensured all eyes were elsewhere. Inspector Japp shifted, his voice gruff. Get to it, Poirot. Who did it? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Patience, mon ami. First, the motive. Madame Giselle's ledgers, found by Monsieur Fournier, revealed debts, secrets, ruin. Lady Horbury, your gambling debts were vast. Your fear of exposure acute. Monsieur Gale, your practice was failing. Your loan from Giselle a noose around your neck. Monsieur Clancy, your debts to Giselle fueled your desperate riding. And Mademoiselle Morizot, your claim to her fortune depended on her death. He turned to the others. Mademoiselle Kerr, your family's name was in Giselle's ledgers, tied to a scandal, long buried. Messieurs Dupont, your expeditions were funded by Giselle, at a price. Dr. Bryant, your pastor patient's death haunted you, known only to Giselle. The room was silent, each face a mask of shock or fear. Poirot's voice softened. But motive alone is not enough. We need opportunity and proof. And so, I devised a test. He produced a small vial, identical to the one found in the luggage, and held it aloft. This, I told you, contained the poison. A lie, Mies Amos, but one that revealed much when I spoke of it. One among you showed no fear, no surprise. One among you knew it was not the true vial, because they had used the poison themselves. The Countess of Horbury's eyes widened, her breath catching. Norman Gale's smile vanished, his hands gripping the table. Clancy's pen fell clattering to the floor. Venetia Kerr's composure cracked, her lips trembling. The DuPonts leaned forward, their faces pale. Bryant's head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Anne Morizot stared, her eyes unreadable. Poirot's voice rose, commanding. The killer is among you, and their name is Norman Gale. A gasp rippled through the room. Gale shot to his feet, his face a mask of outrage. This is preposterous. I'm a dentist, not a murderer. You've no proof. Poirot's eyes were steel. Sit, Monsieur Gale. The proof is overwhelming. You, a dentist, have access to needles, to precision tools, to chemicals. The thorn was no dart, it was a dental needle, coated in venom, flicked from your seat with a device of your own making, hidden in your cigarette case. The wasp, released from a small vial in your pocket, ensured all eyes were turned, and the blowpipe placed under my seat to cast suspicion elsewhere. Gale's face drained of color. You're mad. Why would I kill her? Poirot's voice was relentless. Why? Because Madame Giselle held your secret. Not just alone, Nan, but your past. You were no mere dentist in London, Monsieur Gale. You were once a chemist. Dismissed for tampering with prescriptions, a scandal Giselle uncovered. She blackmailed you, threatening to ruin your new life, your practice, your romance with Mademoiselle Grey. You could not allow her to live. Jane Grey's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Norman, is this true? Gale's shoulders slumped, his voice a whisper. I had no choice. She was going to destroy me. Poirot nodded, his face grave. You planned it meticulously. The venom, obtained through your old contacts. The needle, crafted in your office. The wasp, a touch of genius, inspired by Monsieur Clancy's novels, which you read avidly. And the blowpipe purchased in Paris, placed to mislead. But you could not mislead Hercule Poirot. Japp stepped forward, his voice grim. Norman Gale, you're under arrest for the murder of Madame Giselle. Gale sank into his chair, his head in his hands. As the room erupted in murmurs, the Countess of Horbury sobbed, her relief palpable. Clancy stared, his notebook forgotten. Venetia Kerr's face softened, her silence broken by a sigh. The DuPonts exchanged a look of relief. Bryant lifted his head, his eyes clear. Anne Morizot rose, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I swear it. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Mesdames et messieurs, the truth is found. Monsieur Gale acted alone, his crime a desperate act to protect his secrets. But let us not forget Madame Giselle, a woman whose greed sowed the seeds of her death. Justice is served, but at what cost? He turned to Jane Grey, his voice gentle. Mademoiselle, you have been brave, a true ally to Poirot. Your heart will heal in time. Jane nodded, her eyes wet but resolute. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I'll be all right. Poirot stepped back, his gaze sweeping the room one final time. The case is closed, but let it be a lesson, Mies Amos. Secrets, like clouds, may hide the truth, but the sun of justice always shines through. He turned, his small figure moving toward the door, where Japp and Fournier waited. Outside the sky was clear, the stars bright above the aerodrome. Poirot paused, looking upward, his mustache twitching with a faint smile. Even in the clouds, the truth shines clear, he murmured, his voice soft against the night. The room behind him emptied slowly, the passengers dispersing into the cool evening air, each carrying the weight of their secrets, their fears, their relief. Jane Grey lingered, her notepad clutched to her chest, her eyes on the sky. She took a deep breath, then stepped forward, her steps light, her heart bruised but unbroken. And Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian with the magnificent mustache, walked into the night, his mind already turning to the next mystery, the next truth waiting to be found.